had to move. That's why, if you please, I am on my bended knees. Bertha, don't you come around here anymore. Dress myself in green. Lord, I went on under the sea. Try to see what's going down. Lord, try to read between the lines. I had a feeling I was falling, falling, falling. Lord, I turned around to see. Heard a voice calling. Lord, it was running back to me.
This episode of Dopey is brought to you by Oro Recovery. They're located in sunny Southern California, Malibu, somewhere in Western Los Angeles. Oro was created by our friend Bob Forrest and his friends, Evan, Jared, and Bob. Their mission is to create a treatment center that treats addicts and alcoholics with connection and compassion rather than control. They have many, many decades of experience in treating co-occurring mental health disorders, including severe mental illness. They make sure that your detox is as comfortable as possible, which is so crucial if you're kicking heroin or benzos or alcohol or anything. You want a comfortable detox. They also have amenities you wouldn't believe. Sound bath meditation, surfing, equine therapy, and of course, the potentially spiritually transformative sweat lodge. Everyone that I know that has been to Oro can't say enough good things. If you're fucked and you're willing to go to sunny Southern California, I highly suggest checking out Oro, ororecovery.com. This episode of Dopey is also brought to you by our very good friends at Your Sober Buddy. Your Sober Buddy is a sober app. It's an app that helps you stay sober, helps you maintain sobriety. It has a free tracker. And from what I understand, not enough of you guys in the audience are using the free tracker. They're threatening to pull their sponsorship. Tara, who's in charge of Your Sober Buddy, says she wants the Dopey Nation to download the free sober tracker from yoursoberbuddy.com and post your clean time. Be proud. Be loud and proud, my friends. Loud and proud. Also, it has cool challenges. You hear us doing the challenges. Me and Howie actually just did a bunch of really funny Sober Buddy challenges that we're going to put up on YouTube. So look for that. Go to yoursoberbuddy.com and have a Sober Buddy in your pocket. It's available also at the Google Play Store and the App Store. This episode of Dopey is also brought to you by our great friends at Evolution Accounting and Consulting. They are a full-service accounting firm that can help with your taxes, your bookkeeping, payroll, and almost any other business need you have. Thanks to technology, they work with people from all over the country and pride themselves on building exceptionally strong relationships with their clients. They say that their passion allows you to pursue yours because they understand the stress caused by worrying about taxes and accounting issues. When you allow them to take this off your plate, you'll be freed up to focus on what you love to do. And perhaps more importantly than anything else, the firm is run by a fucking crackhead. That's right, a crackhead. Fortunately, he's been in recovery for years now and knows the struggle as well as the success. Use the promo code DOPEY when you connect with them at www.evolution-accounting.com to receive special discounts. And before we get to the show, I also want to remind you guys about Mobilize Recovery. Our friend Ryan Hampton and his team, it is a great cause. It's going national this September, and it's a project that's actually really close to my heart. It's a nonprofit organization and a way for you guys to pitch in and help end overdose and addiction in America. There's a way for all of us to be involved. There's no cost. There's no hidden agenda. Mobilize Recovery is about all of us, our community, and what we can be doing together to inspire recovery solutions all across the United States. Here is Ryan to tell you guys a little bit more about it.
Hey everybody, this is Ryan Hampton, recovery advocate and founder of Mobilize Recovery. And I'm jumping on with Dopey today because we need you to help end overdose, end addiction, and inspire solutions for recovery across the United States. This September, the nonprofit initiative Mobilize Recovery is launching a national bus tour in partnership with iHeartMedia and Google. And we want to learn what your community, your organization, and your projects are doing to mobilize for change. Help us map the journey across the country. Learn more today at mobilizerecovery.org and submit your ideas to us. There's so many ways for you to get involved and to help us highlight the recovery experience that is so unique in different regions across all 50 states. Go to mobilizerecovery.org to learn more and to help us map this journey. And I hope we get to meet so many of you this coming September during National Recovery Month.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Dopey, the podcast on drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. And my name is Dave, and I am at home on Long Island pondering life and podcasting and recovery and addiction and other dumb shit. And I'm really excited about today's episode. I've been excited about this episode for a while. We recorded this interview a long time ago. And for my money, it's a very special episode. Very special interview. This woman, her name is Carolyn Garcia. She was Caroline Adams. She became known as Mountain Girl in the Merry Pranksters in the mid-'60s in, California, where the acid tests were held. She tells all about it. But for me, it's me dipping my toes into some of the genesis of the counterculture, or at least part of the counterculture that I'm really, really interested in. I pay attention to Dopey Nation on Facebook, and somebody on Dopey Nation was talking about how I care too much about the Grateful Dead. And that could very well be true. I care about the Grateful Dead more than, and it's also just Grateful Dead, but I like to say the Grateful Dead. I care about them more now than I used to, I think. This good old Grateful Dead cast, I think it's my favorite podcast. It's an amazing podcast. I have to say, I have to give a big shout out to Jesse Jarnow and Rich Mayhem over at good old Grateful Dead cast, because that is quite a program over there. And it's got me listening to, in 1972, the Grateful Dead went to Europe, and, Caroline talks about it a bit, but they did They just released every show, and I'm enjoying that. And the good old Grateful Dead cast documents every show, and it's fun for me. I love it. And it's also just as a drug addict, the Grateful Dead are a very important band that chronicle addiction and consequences and getting through it and where does it come from and all that stuff. It's all in there. And also, the Grateful Dead never wanted to do the same thing over and over again, and I really respect that. I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. But mostly, I just really love the music. I love how Jerry Garcia plays. I love how the band plays, and I love a lot of their songs. Doesn't mean I love all their songs, but I love a lot of their songs. Possibly the greatest American band of all time. And one thing I didn't tell Caroline Mountain Girl Adams Garcia was that when I was in high school, I had this clear memory of being in Penn Station, in the basement of Penn Station, and it was, so disgusting. It still is really disgusting. But I have this very clear memory of running into Jerry Garcia there. And it's not possible, in the mid-'80s, but I have this memory of running into this guy that looked just like Jerry with a briefcase. And I don't know. It's one of those things that's always in my head. Now, I hope you guys are well. I hope everyone in the Dopey Nation is well. Even if you're not a Dead fan, I think you'll enjoy this interview. But before we get to the interview, I want to ask you guys to subscribe to Dopey. Nobody does, but subscribe to Dopey on iTunes or wherever you can. Subscribe to YouTube. And more importantly than any of that stuff is go to Patreon. Like I said last week, I put up the weird me high interviewing Bob Weir and Bernie Worrell and buddy Miles. So that's interesting. I put up a new Ask Aaron. There's a ton of new shit coming out on Patreon. And if you love the show and you want to support the show, go to www.patreon.com/dopeypodcast. You know, give $2 and get access to all this shit, or give more. Give 15 and get socks or a hat, something good. If you love Dopey and you want to see Dopey stay happy, joyous, and free, go there. Makes it much easier for my life. And I am still at Katz's, grinding away, doing events, making it happen. And speaking of Katz's, DopeyCon 3 is around the corner. Tickets are about to go on sale October 1st. It looks like, I don't know. The venue is not 100% locked down. We have a couple of options. Get ready. October 1st. Fucking Mick Popham is flying in from New Zealand. The great James Glennie, who I don't give enough credit to, has designed a ton of shit for Dopey. He's coming in from jolly old England with Annie Ellie. Fucking KDB is coming in from the West Coast. Things are happening. And if you're in the Dopey Nation, you don't know these people, go to Dopey Zoom. If you're fucked out there and you're looking for connection, go to Dopey Zoom. The Zoom ID is 804-300-586. The password is Toodles. There's meetings every day. I will post the Zoom schedule right now. If you want Dopey candles, go to the Dopey website, which is dopeypodcast.com. Check out the link to North Ave Candles, or just go to northavecandles.com/collection/Dopey. Fucking Dopey merch. Big Forever in Debt t-shirt is about to be dropped. Check it out at dopeypodcast.com. SRO Prince makes all our shit. It's awesome. All right. And we're also going to do a crazy snapback sale. So look for that. Look for crazy merch posts coming up. Now, I got an email the other day, and it like touched my heart in a really profound way. So I want to read it. All right. It's from a woman named Crystal, and it says, "Hi, Dave. I have been listening to your show for a few months. I was first introduced to it while listening to the podcast Last Days. The host had mentioned Dopey podcast. I think it was Last Day, not Last Days. The host had mentioned Dopey podcast. I was listening to her while I was on a nightly walk. I usually listen to serial killer podcasts, crime and death. Why not? I have been looking for addiction podcasts. I don't really know the reason, other than it gives me some sort of comfort knowing that other people understand what I went through when losing my husband to suicide due to drug-related overdose and gambling addiction. That is a story in itself. I think I could write a goddamn book at this point. Anyway, I was scrolling through and stopped on your podcast after recognizing the name/suggestion from Last Day. My deceased husband was an addict, and 2 of my 3 older children are serious addicts. I don't really know what I expected, but I just started laughing a lot on my walks and in my car during my morning commute to school. I feel I am more sensitive to what my son specifically goes through on a daily basis when he struggles. So in true form, I either binge watch TV as I write IEPs or binge listen to podcasts, etc. This is what I did with your podcast, and I have to say I love it. Additionally, while listening, a person feels like they know you and Chris. You touch and connect with so many people. It's definitely a heartfelt podcast, laughter and all. I cried on the episodes where Todd and Chris passed away. I found it strange as I didn't even know these people, but it was just so sad and heart-wrenching to hear the desperation in loved ones' voices. I feel those emotions when I think of what could happen to my son and potentially will. I can remember other people reflecting on my son's addiction, and many have said he will end up in prison or dead one day. It's terrifying. As a mom, I keep my phone on at night and I sleep very lightly because I don't want to miss a phone call where he might need me. In reality, I know I can't do anything as we live in different states, but as a parent, I just can't fathom not being there when he really needs me. I don't even know what that looks like. I don't give him money. I don't provide anything for him, as he's a grown man, 28. I just feel like I'm going to get a call and miss it, and I'm going to feel such regret, or I will feel responsible, as silly as that sounds. Anyway, I just really appreciate the honesty and support your podcast has provided. I sometimes listen to episodes and cry. Not full on fucking bawling my eyes out, but I definitely shed a tear. Even though I have not experienced what you have, only as a wife and mother to persons addicted, it immediately takes me to my son, who is right there on the verge of just fucking being done. He text messages me sometimes right away to reply. Other times days go by and I just wait for that message or phone call. I leave my phone on, just waiting for that phone to ring. I don't want to miss a call in case something has happened and he needs me 1,200 miles away. Haha. Nothing I can do, but I just feel like I have to wait by the phone. Anyway, thank you for all you do and all the people that you have touched. You have truly made a difference. Respectfully, Crystal. I just have to say thank you, Crystal, for writing this. It really affected me. I think I shed a tear when I read it, and I appreciate, her telling me that I made a difference. Like, I know here and there that I do, but this message just, I don't know, it affected me. And also it made me think of all of us who, I'm in, I have 6 years and 10 months sober right now. And I definitely put my parents through hell and friends through hell. And I know a bunch of you have a bunch of time and a bunch of you don't. And I want us to be helpful to people. Like, if you guys need fentanyl test strips, I know Austin and the Dopey Nation can hook it up. And if you write me that you need fentanyl test strips, we'll get them out to you. Same with Narcan for you guys. Tracy Helton will totally ship it to anybody. So if you guys need any of that stuff, write us at dopeypodcast@gmail.com and we will put you in the right spot. I think we're doing this nonprofit, the Dopey Foundation, that's going to do a bunch of that stuff. So look for all that stuff. Thank you, Crystal. It totally touched my heart. And if you're using, just call your mom. Fucking call your mom back. Just in between scoring dope, call your mom. Be like, I'm okay right now. And then I hear about these people that are doing fentanyl, and there's this thing called phone a friend where you're doing fentanyl and you call someone so that if you die, they can send someone over. So do all that stuff. If you're out there using fentanyl, do the phone a friend, fucking call your mom back, call your dad back. Just try to, I know it's easy for me to say now that I have children and I'm sober, but as somebody that used to get high all the time, just do it. You'll feel better. The high will be better. Maybe the high will be better. Maybe it won't. Anyway, I'm excited as hell for this guest. But before we get to this guest, you need to know that Dopey Podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp.com. BetterHelp.com is an amazing service that connects you with therapists all across the country. Are you guys feeling burnt out? Working too much, not taking enough time for yourself? Have you ever felt burned out? I feel burned out all the time. BetterHelp Online Therapy wants to remind you to prioritize yourself. Yes, I do online therapy and it helps. I love it. It makes me remember to prioritize myself. It makes me feel rejuvenated and refreshed. Remember that BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anybody if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/dopeypodcast. That's BetterHelp.com/dopeypodcast. Get 10% off. Go to BetterHelp. People think it's Better Health, but it's BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/dopeypodcast. Thank you, BetterHelp. And now I know a bunch of you are like, when's Mountain Girl coming on? Well, have no fear. Mountain Girl is here. But before you hear from Carolyn, I just wanted to thank Seth Ferranti, because this interview never would have happened without him. SethFerranti.com. Check him out. So hello and welcome to Dopey, the podcast on drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. And my name is Dave. And I don't know what to say about the guest, because I can't believe we have her on the phone. I kind of fantasize about your life. I'm constantly in her life. She is an author, an artist, a botanist, a farmer, a prankster, a mother, a daughter, a wife. and a cultural icon, and her name is Carolyn Garcia, and you might know her as Mountain Girl or MG. Welcome to the show, to Dopey.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be on with you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. I actually just repurchased the electric Kool-Aid acid test in honor of talking to you, and I find myself, I'm a big fan of yours through osmosis. You know what I mean? But the era when I was like, and it's so funny to me because people like me, you've probably talked to thousands of people like me who have come across your life and they were like, I want to have a life like that.
Good luck is all I can say.
Right.
The early part is a little difficult, is all I can say. The transition from childhood to adulthood had certainly had its rocky points. And I just needed to, figure out who I really was. Who was I as I emerged, from this. I had a science background. My parents were both scientists. So our house was lined with copies of National Geographic and natural science magazines. And of course, I read them all. There was what we read, and encyclopedias and stuff. So I was hyper educated as a kid. And I knew an awful lot about things that other people didn't know anything about. So they singled me out, at school. So I would get special treatment, and that's not good either.
Right. I've always had that sense of you that you were like crazy smart, but around crazy smart people, just from hearing you talk and reading about things you said.
Yeah.
And I was just reading about you today, and I didn't realize that your brother went to Stanford and you followed along. And
that's right.
Is that the story? And what I read was that you, the quote was that you were constantly dipping into psychedelic chemicals at Stanford. Now, how did it all happen? What's the story?
Well, let me just start. Let me go back just a little inch before my brother took me to California, because I'm from Poughkeepsie, you remember. Not much goes on there.
But that was written. Isn't that near where Timothy Leary was?
It was, and that turned out to be kind of cool because. So the deal is, so I get kicked out of high school, right, for being kind of crazy and pulling a bunch of pranks because I was bored. And
wait, what did you do? What did you do?
Oh God. Oh, do I have to go into that?
You don't have to, but I think you brought it up. I didn't even know about these pranks in high school.
I just was an actor. I had one of those brains that's impulsive. I was very impulsive, and I did odd things. I'm just not gonna talk about some of the stuff I did at my high school. But anyway, they expelled me.
Oh, come on! You can't. Come on! You have to tell us what you did. Yeah, you don't have to. What did you do?
I've never told anybody. So
well, we're breaking.
I can't tell you, Dave. I can't tell you. No. Anyway, so me and this other kid that was at school. This was a nice preppy Quaker private school.
I'm with you.
In Poughkeepsie. Yeah, Oakwood School. And this other kid at school, too, he was having strange experiences that I was. And he told me that he saw a flying saucer land behind the boys' dorm. And I completely believed him because he was one of the smartest kids. He was one grade ahead of me. And he was one of the smartest kids in school. And then I began to think that I was being chased by flying saucers. Now that is a radical change from my normal observations. This is all a mental game, by the way. There were no physical,
flying saucers.
No flying saucers. This is just what suddenly grabbed my mind, and it made me a little cuckoo, and I wasn't able to cope. And so I think my behavior changed, and I stopped handing in my homework, and I became a little bit challenging to deal with. And they eventually just said, "You might as well go home now because we don't really want you here."
Because what could be as important as flying saucers? Like, how could your schoolwork in whatever grade be as important as?
So now wait a minute. If the years go by, you ever hear that guy Whitley Strieber?
Tell me.
He's written all these books about UFOs, and he and his buddies live like 10 miles from my house in upstate, where I grew up in upstate New York, and they're seeing flying saucers all the time. Whitley Strieber's written a dozen books about UFOs in upstate New York. And when I read one of his books, this was years later, and I'm going, oh my God, he had the same experiences I did of being, mentally contacted by, aliens, whatever you want to call it. I believed that this was going on at a probably a pretty important part of my youth, when I was 17, let's say.
Well, hold on for 1 second. Are you saying, because I in all of my research, I never stumbled onto the fact that you were visited by aliens in your teen years. Is this what happened? Is this the origin story?
No, this is not what happened. I mean, I just believed it. It wasn't like it happened. It was another thing. It was a conflation of reading too much science fiction, talking to my friend Peter, and hearing his story,
and being imaginative,
and being a little bit hyper imaginative.
Did you watch the X-Files?
I did. I thought they were excellent. I thought they were creepy. They were creepy.
But there was one that really affected me, where there was aliens visiting some kid, but it turned out the aliens were actually Air Force guys in suits. Did you ever see that one?
Suits. I did see that one. It freaked me out. I stopped watching that show after some of those episodes got a little too close to my my inner being, and I didn't want to watch it anymore. It brought it up for me.
Yeah.
So whatever that is that happens to adolescent minds that are a little. I read every science fiction book there was at the library. I mean, I'm a really fast reader for starters. I read them all. I read all of Asimov. I read all of Heinlein. I read those guys it was kind of pathetic. No wonder I was getting bad grades at school. I was reading all this imaginative, wonderful, beautifully written stuff. And it just didn't, I really couldn't do trigonometry at all. So I couldn't do that stuff. Anything real was just too much.
Well, it set the table though for a life of imaginative, wild science fiction based stuff. So how did it turn out that you went from Poughkeepsie to Palo Alto?
Well, my brother, my middle brother, was doing graduate work at Stanford, and he and his wife and kids came home to Poughkeepsie for the summer. And when it was time for them to go back to Stanford, they said casually to my parents, wouldn't it be nice if Carolyn came along with us to California and started her life? Because my mom and dad by that time were up to their eyeballs in, I was not conforming. I was just not conforming to the intellectual goals that my family had set for me. So I hopped in the VW bus with my brother and went to California. And when I got there, it was a really nice place to Stanford.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful place.
Amazing.
I'm just like, wowie. And my brother loaned me his bicycle, and I rode all around looking for a job. And I finally applied at Stanford for a job. And they said, oh, well, what are you good at? I said, well, I'm kind of a science whiz. And they said, oh, here, why don't you go over and talk to this guy over at the mass spectrometer lab? And so I went for an interview with Dr. Carl Gerasi, who actually turned out to be the chemist who invented birth control pills.
Wow.
No kidding. And so, I suddenly, and he and I had a nice chat. He had me read a couple of paragraphs in a science publication of some sort that had long chemical names in it. And I could read that stuff right off the page, no problem. And he hired me on the spot at age 17.
Let me ask you two questions really quick. First of all, at that point, had you smoked weed?
No.
And secondly, I'm not a big destiny person. You know what I mean? I'm not a big fate, destiny, whatever. But it sounds, are you? It sounds like a pretty crazy, just, I know things happen the way they happen, but the fact that your brother was going to Palo Alto and you turned out to be Mountain Girl, just because you were an imaginative science fiction reader, it feels pretty fated, right? Fucking fantastically divined, right? It's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Reading will get you into all kinds of places in the human mind. much faster than talking to people, really, because you can just sit there and read. And that author has created, a separate reality, which is just like magic. And so I had absorbed a lot of separate realities already. So I was ready for the mass spec job. Then the mass spectrometer was in the basement of the organic chemistry building. And it was this huge array of stuff with and then a control panel that I was set in front of and expected to make good things happen.
What kind of good things?
Well, the organic chemistry students upstairs would send down samples of stuff they were either making or were working on developing a profile for, stuff that people were sending in from around the world. And I worked there for 6 months. And the first 3 months was a pretty steep learning curve for me because I had to be able to, run about 10 samples. And the other part was I had the night shift at age 17, which I thought was kind of weird.
Very weird. But kind of irresponsible.
And I had I borrowed a bicycle. So I found I had enough money to find a place to live, an apartment across town over by the railroad tracks. Actually, it was past the railroad tracks. It was way out on Willow Avenue. And so I had a little apartment. And so I would have to go to work at I guess it was like 5 in the afternoon, and then I wouldn't be coming back till 3 in the morning, and have to ride my bike back through Palo Alto in the middle of the night, which today I think would be not really the kind of thing you want your
kid doing, your 17-year-old
kid
daughter,
doing that stuff. But I was completely so certain of myself. I was so sure of myself. I didn't have a single moment's concern about that. So I did it.
And it was a different world too.
It was a different world. It was a kinder world.
And it was a much more innocent world. And all of that would change. And I think the really interesting thing is like you and your group of friends like facilitated a lot of the change, like in a weird way. Like it put everything on crazy high speed. Yeah. What were some of the chemicals that were coming through the lab? phenylketoneurotics, these things that they were experimental combinations of organic chemistry, because I'm in the basement of the organic chem lab. So the world of plants and animals is a chemical factory of incredible complexity. There are just a gazillion combinations out there, and these long chain molecules that they're trying to decipher. So that's what the mass spectrometer does, is it gives you, it atomizes the sample in a beam of electrons inside the machine, and then it bursts it apart, and all of the characteristics of the atoms in that sample are read by number by the machine. In other words, in a magnetic, it has a little magnetic reader that it puts this beam of vaporized sample through this magnetic reader, and it reads the signatures, the atomic signatures of these various atoms that go through there, so they can get a count of how many oxygen atoms, how many carbon atoms. So you're interpreting the chemicals through this machine.
I'm having to write down all these notes and stuff. It was pretty amazing.
What's amazing is that you're this total science fiction nerd doing exactly what you were meant to do. You know what I mean? What?
But upstairs, I'm down in the basement, and the big doors are shut. Upstairs is the organic chemistry lab, and I'm on the night shift. So at night, who's up in the organic chemistry lab? And all of the foreign exchange students, from all over the world, from Poland and Germany and South America and stuff. They're not speaking English. They're all yammering away, and they're having parties up there because the teachers have all gone home. The staff has all gone home. They're just in there doing their research projects. and they got this huge lab all to themselves, and they're making alcohol and having big drinking parties. So finally one night I decided I just had to go up there and see what they're all laughing about, because they were just hysterical laughter is coming down the stairs, and I'm like, God damn it, I'm lonesome down here. Nobody ever comes down here while I'm working. I got to go see what they're doing.
Right.
So I went up there and I got a little, they were making alcohol, of course. So I got a little tipsy on some vodka, and went back down, and I kind of screwed up my routine. You know, I screwed, because I don't drink. I'm not an alcohol person.
Me neither.
And I kind of screwed up my routine a few times, and I messed up the sample, and just, you know, I started to get in a little bit of trouble.
A little sloppy.
And then something came across my desk a few weeks after that, and I did get reprimanded by my boss. But a couple of weeks after that, another sample. He says, "Be very, very careful with this one. It's a psychedelic from these researchers that are old students of mine. They're in Africa. We think it's something called iboga."
Wow, ibogaine.
Plant called
right.
Yeah. So I said, "Oh, very interesting. Of course, I'll take great care of that." Well, of course, I ate some of it.
Did you know? Did you know straight away what a psychedelic was?
Of course, I had done all this reading. I had read everything.
Right.
So I knew perfectly well what I was, and I thought I took such a tiny little piece of it. It couldn't have been, I mean, it was really small, little piece of their green mush that they had sent in to be processed. I just ate a little tiny dab of that. Oh man, it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. I've taken it. It's very, very powerful.
So I'm like practically on the floor all of a sudden.
You can't work. You can't be interpreting.
Couldn't get anything done.
Yeah.
No. And so I'm going, uh-oh, you know, I'm thinking, oh, heck, you know, what am I going to do? And, you know, making it to the bathroom was very difficult. And I finally found the bathroom. It was just one door, you know, but I was lost in space. And this was very unnerving. And so I finally decided the best thing for me to do was just to sit in the chair and close my eyes and fold my hands and not try to do any more work. After having blown the mass spectrometer ran on a high vacuum, and I had accidentally released gotten air into it. Right. It was having to redo itself. And that takes hours. And anyway, I just kind of gave up and just sat there. And my boss came in at 8:00 in the morning. And I'd been there since 10 o'clock at night, basically. And he says, "Oh, what are you still doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I fell asleep, you know." And
you were tripping, though.
Really, for real. And I had never tripped before. I hadn't even smoked pot.
Right.
So
ibogaine was your first high.
That's my
crazy.
First high. No, anyway. So I get on my bicycle and I have to make it back to my apartment, and that was interesting.
You're having your Albert Hoffman moment.
I had the Albert Hoffman moment for sure, and it was difficult because my eyes were so heavily affected by the iboga that I couldn't see straight, and I had to like squint really hard to make them focus on anything. You know, it was like really hard work. But I made it back to my apartment and made it and found my key and everything and actually got in and collapsed. And so I was out for about 24 hours.
Yeah, it's heavy.
But after that, I was scrambled. And I could no longer run the mass spectrometer. I just couldn't. I couldn't do the sequence. It was like a 12-step sequence that you had to do perfectly timed. You know, beep, 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 you do this, you do this, you do this. And I couldn't manage it anymore. And he fired me like about a week later.
So do you think since then, like, and this is not me putting you down or making fun of you, but do you think since you took the first iboga, you've been scrambled? You were like super brain doing these sequences. Have you been scrambled ever since?
I'm not as good with machinery as I could. I would say that, you know, with the automatic stuff, I'm not that good. And yeah, I don't think I'm quite the same person as I was. Just not quite as clever, but I try. I really do.
No, I'm playing, but it's like, so you get fired from the gig and like, and also it's funny. I mean, maybe it's not funny, but in all the reading I've done about Ken Kesey and the Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia and the Merry Pranksters, I've never heard this story. And I don't know why that is. Why is that?
Because I didn't tell him.
You saved it for Dopey.
No, I was ashamed. I've saved it really for now I talk about it, but I've given you a very clean recording of what my story is without it too much detail. Don't let me go into detail, whatever.
Why? But, what did we miss? I hate to
No,
miss
it's just there's two there, we're not missing anything. Basically, I walked around Palo Alto for a while at night looking at the sky thinking I was seeing alien spaceships. I mean, I really did kind of go a little cuckoo.
Wow.
So
when I took Ibogaine, I had an experience that I was in my apartment and I had an experience that I took it to get off of heroin. I took it. I had some weird company in Denmark send it to me for free in New York, and I took it because it promised to help heroin addicts have a psychedelic experience and to get off of heroin. And I didn't take it the way I was supposed to, but I had an experience where I met an alien. I met an alien at a desert at a pyramid. And
you're kidding.
And the alien was blue, okay? And he had a triangle on his head. And he kind of had a Freddie Mercury kind of mustache. And I don't know if I took too much or not enough, but I decided he was kind of a loser. And I didn't listen to him. And I fucking woke up from the dream, and it was like, you know what I mean? Did not. I have a lot of friends who've taken it, and they had much more compelling experiences. But I think it really connects you with space and
yes. Oh my God, you're the only other person I've ever spoken to that did that.
Really?
That took Ibogaine.
Really?
Yeah, I've never spoken to anybody else that tried it. And of course, I have no idea how much I got, but that's given me, I'm got goosebumps right now.
Wow.
So that's awesome, Dave. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I feel a lot better.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, so
that's incredible. That was what I was looking up in the sky and seeing the lights moving around the sky. And I was absolutely certain that I was seeing alien ships, but then somebody told me, oh no, that's planes in a landing pad for the San Francisco airport. And then I felt like an idiot.
That's funny. It's funny. I mean, like I felt like an idiot. Just my story sounded idiotic, but it was profound. You know what I mean? It happened. Yeah. Now, in my reading about you and listening to you tell stories, like I'm trying to find everything I can find. And the story I have for how you encountered the pranksters, like I didn't know that you had how many other drugs had you done before Cassidy picks you up at a coffee shop?
0. I had smoked some weed, which I thought was great. I had gotten turned on to weed by a boyfriend that I had, and then he left Palo Alto to go back to where he lived, and suddenly I was on my own. And the day that he left, I had traded in my bicycle for a Honda. I had a Honda 125, which was or maybe it was a 150. I can't remember, but it was a little motorcycle type thing.
That's awesome.
And I had driven it all over California during my recovery period, I would call it. And suddenly I had this nice boyfriend, and then he was gone.
Wait, why did you call it your recovering period?
Recovering from losing my job. I had to go until I ran out of money, because I had saved quite a bit of money. Working at Stanford was a good job, and I had somehow screwed that up. But anyway, so my boyfriend left, and suddenly I was there with an empty house and just a little bit of weed. And I got on my motorcycle. I thought, well, I'll go down to the coffee shop and have a cup of coffee. It's like 10 o'clock at night. So I putted over to St. Michael's Alley in Palo Alto, and there was nobody in there except for the cranky guy behind the counter, who turned out later to be Bob Hunter.
No way.
Yes.
No way.
He was the manager, and I didn't know that. And he yelled at me for leaving my motorcycle on the sidewalk. So I had to go out and move it. And I came back in.
Well, hold on though. For anybody who's listening, Bob Hunter is Robert Hunter, who was the lyricist for the Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia's partner, and great, just brilliant guy. So he yelled at you for parking the motorcycle outside of the fucking coffee shop.
Yeah, right outside on the middle of the sidewalk. Because I was in a terrible mood. My boyfriend had left. I didn't have a job, I was half crazy. And so anyway, I was in a really bad mood. So I sat down. There was nobody in the place. I had my nice big cup of hot coffee and I'm drinking it, staring moodily at whatever. And in walk these two guys. And there's a blonde kid with a Stanford Letterman's jacket and this older guy. And they sat down and they're looking at me, right? They're giving me the eye.
They like you.
And I'm shooting them back kind of a dirty look, like, fuck off.
They're like, don't look at me.
Yeah, don't look at me. And so they just stand right up and come right over to my table and sit down. So hey. One of them, and the guy with the Stanford jacket is this cute blonde guy, and he's a tennis star, and his name is Bradley. And the other guy is Neil Cassidy. And they say, hey, we've got a car. We're going to go score some weed. You want to come? And I'm going like, okay, because I was in that nihilistic mood where nothing really mattered at that moment.
Hold on, though, for a second, okay?
Yeah.
You walk into a coffee shop. Robert Hunter's the barista, and fucking Neil Cassidy comes walking in. What is Bob Dylan outside fucking playing Blowing in the Wind? Like, what the fuck is going? Why is that happening? Like, it's like it's crazy how small a world of supernovas you're in.
Isn't that the strangest thing? I've puzzled over this for years, and it just is happenstance. I happened to be there. I happened, and suddenly I had other stuff happening. So I get in the car. Neil is driving, and what does he do? The car has this funny little sign on the door, and it says "It is," and it's got like a little thing. And I said, "Well, it is. What is that?" And
it is
Neil
what?
He says, oh, that's a church group, he tells me.
Right.
And I'm going, okay, great. This must be okay. It's a church group. So I get in the car between Bradley and Neil. Bradley's got his hand on one knee, and Neil's got one hand on my other knee.
Wow.
So off we go. Neil whips the car around. It's like midnight now. And he whips the car around in the middle of the street and backs up in reverse on University Avenue in downtown Palo Alto up onto the railroad tracks, where he commences to drive. I guess he was driving north on the railroad tracks in reverse. And I'm going, what the hell are you doing? It's going bump, 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 bump on the railroad ties. And I'm going, what the heck are you doing? Why are you doing this? He says, oh, I like to drive on the railroad. If you go in reverse, it saves the front end.
Wow.
That was his explanation.
Hold on one second though, because anybody in the audience who doesn't know who Neil Cassidy was, Neil Cassidy was a American writer and a poet, and his big claim to fame was he was the main character in Jack Kerouac's book On the Road, Dean Moriarty. Right. And I always loved, I mean, like my, what I knew about this story was I was in college reading these books, and like when Neil Cassidy turned up in your circle, I was like, holy shit, like how did he get there? Blah, blah, blah. But he also wound up dying on the railroad tracks, right?
He did indeed. Yes. And that's very sad too, that happened. He was only 41.
He lived hard though. He lived very hard.
Yeah, he did. And people didn't understand him. Although nobody really fully understood him. But he was driven. He had demons of his own.
Sure.
I don't think they were bad demons. I think they were just pushy. But
he
anyway,
also was super into speed, right? Into meth.
He liked bennies. And that was the whole purpose of getting in the car. They were going to go score some bennies.
Right.
So Benzedrine.
Sure.
And so he's driving in reverse up the railroad tracks, and I'm clutching the dashboard going, holy cow, you guys,
right.
A train could come along at any second and kill us. And he says, oh, and he pats me on the knee and he says, oh, don't worry, dear. I work for the railroad. I know what time the trains are coming.
Right.
And so we go up the railroad tracks about half a mile, and it is incredibly hard on the car. It's going slam, 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 slam. You know, it's just like, oh my God, this is
It's
so
a movie.
crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It's totally crazy. And I'm going, oh, Jesus Christ, I have to get out of this car. And so he finally just pulls off into a little park. It's the Palo Alto Park where the Palo Alto is Spanish for tall tree.
Mm.
But the tall tree's been gone for years. But they made a park where it used to be called Palo Alto Park. And he just slams the car off the tracks, you know, bumpity, bumpity, bump, down the embankment and spins the car around and parks perfectly in this little park. And we get out and sit on the bench and roll a number. And then they start talking to me.
Roll a number, meaning like roll a joint?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I'm just like, I'm already in another phase of my life. I can tell I've changed just in 15 minutes.
Well, it's funny also because like pre Stanford, you were like invested in science fiction and you hit science fiction.
Yes.
Then post getting fired, you're hitting nihilism, and who shows up but like the ultimate nihilist tour guides, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're on the railroad track and you're like, maybe this is more than I bargained for.
Definitely. And so Neil is older, of course. He's like 39 or something like that when I met him. But Bradley is this kind of adorable blonde letterman with a tennis racket in his hand from Stanford. So I was kind of thinking Bradley looked interesting. So I agreed to go along with them on their search for Benzedrine at 1:00 in the morning. And off we went and drove all over Palo Alto and went up and over the mountain. And finally, Neil, they were unable to score. And finally, Neil says, well, I have to take this car back. And so we go down the other side of the hill toward the coast. And he whips into this driveway to this little cabin and parks the car. And it's Ken Kesey's house.
Right.
And that's whose car it was he had borrowed.
Is that the cottage in Perry Lane?
No, this is his house down in La Honda in the woods.
That was the spot, the crazy spot.
Yeah. This was an important place that it would become for me. Anyway, so in the yard is this bus, a big old school bus that's painted all these crazy colors. And I mean, I thought my eyes were going to fall out of my head. Talk about aliens. Aliens were forgotten. I saw that bus. It was completely slathered with crazy Day-Glo paint and little bits of stuff and had words painted on it. And I'm going, you know, it blew my mind, quite frankly. You know, I'm walking all around this bus and I'm looking at it and I'm going, I can't believe this. Who would do this? What, you know, meanwhile, the place is completely quiet. The family, we're going, shh, don't wake up anything. And, you know, it'll da-da-da. So I go around the bus and I look at the door. And the door is kind of like half hanging off. You know, the door that you climb up the little steps and into the bus for school kids. And so I pull the door open and I notice that it says, oh God, what did it say on the door? It said, nothing lasts.
Wow.
Was written on the door. And I looked at that and I went, what? You know, it was like, it entered my mind like a meme, like nothing lasts. And I was like, it was so puzzling to have that written on the door. And so I went in the bus and it really smelled funky in there. And somebody was snoring in the back. So I got back out again. And just about that time, the door opens and the dogs come out and start barking and barking. And
it's like a fairy tale. It's like Goldilocks or something.
And the sun is, you know, the dawn. It's starting to be dawn. You know, the sun is coming up through the redwood trees, and I'm standing there and I'm looking all around in this completely different place. And Ken Kesey steps out the door and comes out and he says, "Shh, you know, everybody's still sleeping." And we went back to there was a little building in the back of the property where he had his writing studio. And we all went in there and shut the door and turned on the heater. And Neil was really basically trying to get Ken to give him the car for the rest of the day. And Ken was saying, no, we have to take our kids to school today. It's the first day of kindergarten for them. This is September of 1964.
Incredible.
And they had just come back from the famous Kesey Prankster bus trip that very day.
And that was the bus trip. That was the bus trip where they went to Timothy Leary's place, and they met Kerouac and all that stuff.
That's right. So I met them the next morning.
And Ken Kesey was a famous novel. Anyone who doesn't know who Ken Kesey is, he was a very, very famous novelist.
Yeah, he wrote Sometimes a Great Notion and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is about his experience in he called it the Nut House, which is not very polite. But the Palo Alto had a pretty good sized mental hospital that he got a job as an orderly there and was working the night shift and got into the
Psychedelic,
the stash there. He got into the stash there that Osmond had left there when he was there studying crazy people. They were trying to see if psychedelics would have a good effect on people with mental health issues. And apparently they didn't, because they abandoned the research.
Right.
But they left all the stash there, and Ken found it.
And was that before or after the MK Ultra thing?
This was, I think, MK Ultra kept going. I don't think it was over. I'm not really sure about the timing, but in my to my inner calendar, there was still the guts of MK Ultra was still going on in San Francisco. They were still dosing people and seeing if they wanted to jump out the window.
Had he volunteered to work in the psych ward, or he was in MK Ultra also, wasn't he?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Well,
I think he was. I think he just had a night job, keeping an eye on people in the psych ward.
And how kindred? Because you had worked that job in Stanford, and how quickly did you guys bug out that you basically did the same thing?
It took quite a while for everybody's stories to come out. So
right.
I'm just giving you the fast version here.
Wow, I appreciate that.
But that was my night, and that was when my life completely changed.
Like Alice in Wonderland kind of thing.
Yes. I mean, talk about, and it was only because I was willing.
Right.
Because, I was willing to take a risk. And that was partly because I had a kind of a big ego that nobody can mess with me kind of thing.
Well,
I'll be fine.
You were also meant to do this. Everything that had happened, and I'm not one of these people that says that kind of thing, but when you tell me your story, it's like you had a big ego, but you were also the right person to meet these fantastical people that take fantastical chemicals. That's right.
And so that's how it all got started. And that's how it all began for me. And then they said, well, come on back, and we're going to have a prankster party in 2 weeks, to reconnect everybody that had been on this famous bus trip, because they had just gotten back that day. I showed up, 10 hours later, and, I was a good looking girl. I was tall and independent and smart. And we all got along famously immediately. So I was conscripted, as they say. They took me in.
How soon after that night were you constricted?
2 weeks. It was 2 weeks to their party.
Do you remember the 2 weeks in between? Were you like, I got to get back there? Did you have that sense of holy shit, I want to be part of that?
I was out riding around California on my motorcycle.
Because you were truly independent.
I was truly independent, and I was running out of money. I moved out of my place, and I found a cabin up on the top of the San Bruno mountain or something. That was in that mountain range there behind Palo Alto, with this crazy guy, Walt Voorhees, which I'm sure some of your listeners might have ever met Walt Voorhees, but he was this 6'6" crazy guy who had a big ranch up there, and he rented rooms to various single people who were working down at Raytheon and at the early Microsoft. And, this whole computer thing was happening
right
in the Bay Area at that point. So So a lot of single people, a lot of singles. So he had this great big house with a lot of rooms, and he had one more shack out back, and I rented that for like $25 a month.
Why do I know that name Voorhees?
I don't know why you know it, but he was a character, and he was also an early LSD adopter, I'm quite sure. And he didn't talk about it with me, and I didn't talk about it with him, but I'm darn certain that he was part of the early LSD trade,
right?
And was in on it. His eyes were especially luminous when he looked at me, and I ran for cover, man. He was a great big dangerous dude with a room full of guns, right? He was the first gun nut I ever met.
He was no Bradley. He was no Bradley tennis star.
No, he was not safe. And so I kept a very strict distance between him and me. And I only went up there if I thought he couldn't see me coming. You know, I had to avoid him. But so I had this little cabin that had no electricity for a couple of months as I was adjusting to not having a job. And then I started going down to the Prankster party. I went down to the Prankster party, which was 2 weeks after I met Ken. And, that went really well. We had a great time. And I got my first
dose,
my first little tiny dose of LSD shortly after that.
Tell us the story.
Well, he said, would you like to try some LSD? And of course, I'd heard about it by that time, but I hadn't realized that this was their community glue. You know, this was what they were doing.
The sacrament.
Whatever.
For their church group. For their church group.
Church group. This was our church group.
Yes.
Yeah, so I took a tiny dose. Probably about 50 mics, I think he gave me that first dose. And I sat outside in the yard. I said, what should I do? And he says, well, I'll put some music on. So they put some music on in the house, and I could listen to that. But I was sitting there in the yard, and I'm looking down, and the leaves, it was fall, and the leaves suddenly started to rearrange themselves on the ground.
Do you remember what music he played?
Oh, God, he was playing some classical music. It was one of those, like, I think it was Zarathustra, actually. He was playing Zarathustra, and it was booming out. He had a big stereo system with big speaker boxes, which had been on the bus. But so
in the trees, right? That was
in the trees, definitely. So I'm looking at the leaves on the ground, and they're starting to like move around in cool patterns. And so I'm going, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm actually starting to hallucinate. I was really excited. To me, this was a research project. And I'm a scientist, and this is really, really interesting. So
better than Iboga.
Better than Iboga. Yeah. And I had, this was my mindset. So of course I wanted more. So I had a glowing report for everybody about how I liked my little 50 mic dose, and realized that we were really onto something, that this was definitely scientific research. And I was really, really interested.
And social and like weird social research
and interest. And so then I began to meet first Neil's girlfriend, Anne Murphy, who was this fabulous, voluptuous, redheaded girl.
Right.
Of course, Neil was also married, but Anne Murphy was his girlfriend, and she was really kooky, and Neil was as strange as they come, and hyper, very hyper. And I met the rest of the pranksters, who were sweet college kids, college grads, most of them. And Equipment Hassler, who ran a bookstore in Santa Cruz, and Zonker, who I don't know quite what he ever did. I'm not sure.
Okay.
And, so and the list went on, and and my friend Malfunction was another one, and he's still my dear friend. It's just, these folks are still alive, and they're close by, and they're still my friends. And and I found my friendship group. They were as weird as I was. And that was like, I was so happy about that. I mean, it was like a gift of the gods. Suddenly I found my people that I could relate to.
Right.
And we've been close ever since.
Well, it's funny because when I was in school, like I was in a band, and I wanted something different, and I read that book, you know, the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which tells your story. You know what I mean? Like I honestly think a movie about you, where you're like, it's like, because like people expect the movie about Kesey or Jerry Garcia or whatever.
The male
right.
ones, yes, the male co-conspirators, my co-conspirators.
But
yes.
the movie about you, like an Alice in Wonderland thing, it's just fantastic to hear the story. But so like I remember when I had taken acid a bunch of times, but like the idea was like I want to do what they did, and I'm sure like, you know, you've spoken to infinite numbers of people who are like, I wanted to do what you guys did.
Oh yeah.
Which have a group mind and try to live in a different way. And when I say sacrament, I mean, I like the way you reacted to it. You were like, we could call it that. Which I think is funny because so many people are like, they mystify it in a way that almost becomes quasi-religious. And it sounds like you didn't experience it like that.
No, for me, it was doors of perception all the way. You know, that's what, because I could suddenly see deeper into reality, and reality was displaying itself to me. You know, I could see it. And that was to me fascinating. I come from a science family. My parents were both scientists. My father was an entomologist and my mother was, she was a botanist. You know, all the literature in our house was science-based. And that's why I did so well in school and aced my SATs and stuff, because I already had read all that stuff.
Well, you were also obviously incredibly smart. How often, when you joined, how quickly were you Mountain Girl? Like, when did that happen?
Immediately. So as I was being introduced to the other pranksters at the recapitulation of the bus trip party, I was introduced to Malfunction, my friend, also known as Mike Hagan, who lives near me in Eugene. He looks at me. He said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, you know, I'm new around here." And he says, "Well, where do you live?" I said, "Well, I have a cabin up on the mountain up there." He says, "Oh, well, you must be Mountain Girl then." And I just went, "Oh God."
Because they were calling you Mountain Girl, and that's how he knew.
And the minute I told them, when they said, "Where do you live?" And I said, "I live up on the mountain." They said, "Well, you must be Mountain Girl then." Ha ha ha.
Right.
And I'm going like, what's funny about that? It's like, how do I get out of this? It was too late. It was done.
And how quickly did it go from Mountain Girl to MG? MG sounds like a car, you know. Mountain Girl sounds like a movie, you know.
I MG'd it a little later, you know, because Mountain Girl was getting a little tedious, you know.
It's too much. And you seem like a very down-to-earth New York type. What was I going to say? So when does it start? When did you get romantic with Kesey, and how much acid are you taking?
We were very lightweight acid takers, according to some. And I think we were holding ourselves to no more than 100 mics a run. And that was plenty, really, for me. But Ken's idea, and he was kind of the master of ceremonies at all times. You know, this was his
chief.
direction. He was the chief, and he was the one he was an idea man.
Right.
He had a lot of ideas, not all of them great, but they were ideas, you know. So he gave them a lot of time in his mind. So the next thing he wanted to do was have parties out at his place there in La Honda. So he starts inviting people out, and of course, there's always a little electricity in the punch.
Right.
And it was really a lot of fun. It was really interesting to see how various people reacted to just a little bit of electricity in their system, because we were going very low dose. And it was really the only way to go with folks who are working regular jobs and have a face in the community. You just don't want to go big. You want to go small. But they enjoyed it, you know, and basically beer was also being served, so it wasn't just a pure thing. And I had already embraced marijuana as my personal favorite.
Sure.
In the drug parade. So I was able to share that with my new friends. And, you know, within a couple of weeks, we were driving around on the bus, and in such a wonderful bunch of people, I just kept pinching myself. I couldn't believe my good fortune.
Well, fun was also the coolest thing when you read about
Yeah.
it and when you pay attention to it was there wasn't some horrible thing behind the curtain. It was fun. You know, the drive was fun. Merry pranksters. Doesn't sound like, you know, sons of Satan or something.
No,
you
no,
know?
it was not. It was not. It was all in fun, and it was all meant to sort of, you know, poke fun at the status quo in America in those days. You know, that's what we were doing. We made up silly signs. We were as entertaining as we could possibly be.
It was also like the first really, I mean, like there has always been counterculture and bohemianism and stuff, but you guys turned it into a flashy, explosive. It was like counterculture based on pop. You know what I mean? It was like the antithesis of pop music, pop commercials, bright colors, big ideas, cartoons, superheroes. And it was the counterculture of that, which is so attractive to me. And it's always been so attractive to me. When do you and Kesey become cozy, romantic?
Well, it was a while. And it was very infrequent, to say the least.
Okay.
And but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but because it did happen. But you know, he was I don't know how to say it. He liked to dabble.
Yeah, he got around.
Dabble.
He was the chief.
He got around. I wasn't the only one in his hit parade. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
There was many others, and it was sporadic and very infrequent. So,
but you got pregnant.
Eventually, eventually I did. A couple years down the road, and that wasn't the best thing in the world, but it turned out okay. It all turns out okay. I had at a certain point, the number of times we got busted was getting a little onerous, and because the cops just thought we were, you know, something really, really important, something really big that needed to be crushed.
Sure.
So they would park cop cars outside, you know, and just wait for us to have a party, you know, or to have people over or whatever. And, you know, by this time I've abandoned my cabin on the mountain, and I'm now sleeping in the arms of a big multi-trunked bay tree on Kesey's property.
Wow.
Along the creek. And, it was fine. You know, I had a sleeping bag and a pillow, and I could just curl up there in the middle of this whole tree trunk little area, and felt pretty safe. But sooner or later, fall came and it began to rain. So that kind of changed the vibe, and I had to find someplace else to stay. And that all of these things led to other things. And you know, pretty soon we were on the police radar so heavy that we really couldn't do anything, and we just had to get in the bus and go elsewhere. And that's when Ken came up with the idea of doing the acid tests, you know, rather than have it at his house.
It's funny. I'm just riding along with you. And I was like, when are we going to get to the acid test? But that's when so tell me, do you remember the first time you heard about it?
Well, he came up with the idea, and you know, I mean, basically to the gathering of his crew, of the pranksters. And he's saying, I've got this great idea. We're going to do these shows and call them acid tests. And all of our mouths fell open at once. You know, oh, that's clever, you know. And so basically that's what we did. So we did one in San Jose. We did one in Palo Alto that not very many people showed up for.
One in Watts, I remember reading about.
That was later. Yeah, when things got too hot, and things did get hot. So we did go south to LA. You know, so we kept going. We just kept it going.
My question is this. You had this incredible community of incredibly close friends, and you got to dip your toe into the psychedelic and you could say you guys were like the original hippies, but if you look around the world, there's hippies popping up everywhere kind of concurrently. Yes. And everybody innovated and caught on to the other person's innovation. But what do you think made Ken Kesey decide to share it, like to bring other people in, to open it up?
There was this streak in him. He was a showman.
Right. P.T. Barnum.
He was a showman. He loved putting on shows. He had a magic act that was incredible. He was a magician. He had studied magicianship, so he could do sleight of hand. He could make stuff appear and disappear. He could, pop stuff out of, he was very good at it. And for a guy with great big hands, he's a big guy.
Yeah.
And he had these big hands and big fat fingers. And he could just manipulate objects and make them appear and then disappear. Like you couldn't believe it. Was really cool.
He seemed very magical. Tom Wolfe can't stop talking about his muscles. Every six paragraph about Ken Kesey was how muscular he was.
Yes, he was a wrestler. He was a college wrestler.
Yeah.
So yes, he was muscular and very clever. His brain was a little bigger than normal people's brains, is the way his head was large.
Yeah.
And he had a lot going on in there. He had way more going on inside his head than anybody that I'd ever met before.
Right.
So that was fascinating because he was very generous with his thoughts. He wanted to share them with you all the time. And it was like, as a receptive female, I got a lot of thoughts shot in my direction. So we had a lot of deep conversations. And so he would invite folks to his house. We had Ginsberg. We had Ginsberg and his friends, Peter Orlovsky, and then Peter Orlovsky's brother. And they went to a protest in Berkeley and met the Hells Angels who were there, the Oakland Angels. And then he invited the Oakland Angels to come down to La Honda for a party.
Yes.
And that was wild. And so we got to hang out with these really kind of amazing people and find out their sort of secret stuff that they did. And they were, the pranksters were loose, and most of them had jobs out in the world that they had to do, and we'd get together on weekends. The Hells Angels were quite different.
Sure.
And they had rules, and they had these various things
they were hardened, wilder people. They weren't college kids.
They were outlaws.
Right.
They were real outlaws. So we thought we were outlaws. Then we met them, and it was like, holy shit. But the whole thing was that Ken surreptitiously turned them on.
He dosed them.
Indeed.
How did he do it?
Well, I think he was above board some of it, and he offered it, and they said, yeah, sure. What harm could that do? That's like pussy drugs. That's like nothing to us. We're used to the hard stuff. So they went for it, some of them, and some of them had a better time than others.
Right? It softened a bunch of them, I remember.
Some of them didn't like it at all. So that was one and done. So for some of them, that was because it too messed with their heads. But other ones took to it. And Freewheelin' Franklin.
Yeah.
And Sonny Barger, and a bunch of these New York Angels and the Oakland Angels and the San Francisco Angels. And we saw a lot of them over the years, and they became conversant with our friend, and they partook. That's all I can say.
And when does the dead show up? When do the Warlocks show up?
Oh, they were there. They were there all along. I was taking guitar lessons from down at Dana Morgan's music store in Palo Alto.
Was Jerry teaching you?
No, unfortunately, he was in the next room teaching somebody else, but I heard him because occasionally I would go down there for my guitar lesson, and my teacher wouldn't show up, and I would just sit in there and wait for him, and I could hear Jerry teaching guitar to somebody else in the next room.
That's crazy.
So when I finally met him, I'm going, hey, wait a minute, I know your voice. But anyway, Ken had him come down to his place. He invited them to come down to his place to play at one of the parties. And that's how we all met up. And then when we went out to do the acid test, we got in the bus and had to get out of La Honda because the cops were really leaning on us hard. And we had to go do acid tests, and we had them come play. And they thought it was really cool. And they'd get a little high, and they'd play, and they'd play and play and play, and they'd play until their fingers were about to fall off. So they discovered that LSD was kind of great for
fuel.
Doing good fuel for a show, taken in cautious amounts. So they became our co-conspirators, basically.
Were they pranksters officially?
No,
No,
not really.
They weren't. Was Captain
the
Trips?
band.
Was Captain Trips Jerry's prankster name, or just some weird moniker that he got?
It was a weird moniker. We didn't really give him that name. Somebody else did, but it embarrassed him. He didn't like it.
I'm sure.
Yeah, he didn't like that one. So none of the other guys in the band got monikers like that, and so he kind of ducked that one.
Well, Pigpen had Pigpen.
Pigpen had always been Pigpen. They had dubbed him Pigpen before we met him. Pigpen didn't like LSD. He was a cigarettes, and he liked beer and a little liquor mixed in. So,
how did he deal with it? How did he deal with these jams and he's not tripping? Unless they dosed him, which I read about a lot.
They did dose him, and he didn't like that. He really didn't like that. It wasn't his thing. So, basically he would just sing and he just played along. It was great practice for those guys to come and play to a bunch of wired people, because we weren't really taking that much. We weren't getting zonked. And it wasn't until some more acid arrived from somewhere that we had a few people who took a little bit too much and had to learn how to not exceed, a certain
dosage.
Number there.
Right.
Yeah. Dosage is really important.
Totally.
Less is,
less
more
is
is not.
More is less.
Is not necessarily good with LSD. Less is more, really. Less is good. You want to stay in control of yourself. You really want to be able to walk around and talk to people and get a drink of water and take care of yourself and not be a fish on the floor flailing, wishing you were in the water or something.
Yes,
it's just, you want to retain your sense of self. And I think it's very important.
Definitely. I've been on both ends of that. And it was never good if it was too much. It was never good for me. And I've heard you describe yourself as a lightweight also.
Yes.
And when did Jerry give you the eye in all of this?
It wasn't until much later. I think we were at one of the acid tests. Maybe it was like the Portland acid test or the I can't remember when it was. It was late in the game, but by that time I was pregnant and my tummy was sticking out, and we were still very much under the unpleasant gaze of the police.
Right.
And so we decided to take a run. We jumped into the psychedelic bus and went to Mexico. And by going to Mexico, on the way, we did a show in San Jose. We did a show in LA. We did a couple of shows in LA. We think Charles Manson came to the shows in LA because we advertised basically pretty thoroughly. And then I think we did one more show in San Diego at a community college that didn't go very well. And then we just zipped over the border and drove down into Mexico until we found what we thought was a safe spot.
Right.
And we stayed there for 6 months until our visas were up.
Did you have sunshine in Mexico?
Yes, I did. So she's a Mexican.
Wow. Awesome. And so how did, and like, how did you, I mean, this is not to, embarrass or, shame you or whatever. How did you deal with being pregnant in this wild scene?
Well, I think by the time we got to Mexico, we were pretty tired and broke and, really kind of scuffling. Yeah, we were pooped. And Ken had been arrested and released, and so he was a fugitive, which added to the drama considerably. So there was a lot of drama going on. Somehow, by the grace of our cosmic deity, we were able to find a really nice, sort of a slightly unfinished house that was being built on the beach in Monseño, Mexico, and it was big enough for everybody. It was a big house with like 4 bedrooms, and we were able to get bedding and all that stuff. And then the house next door, there was a little house next door that Ken Babbs and his girlfriend had, because his girlfriend Gretchen was also pregnant at the same time. Gretchen Fetchen also had a daughter whose name was Casa.
Wow.
And I had little sunshine down there in the Hospital Civil. Under the no anesthetico.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that was an experience too. But I came out of it with this really nice baby, very healthy, beautiful baby. And there was no sign of the damage that LSD was supposed to do to your unborn child.
Thank God.
Thankfully. Well, I wasn't concerned because I knew we were we were small dosing, because if you took too much, you couldn't work the gear, and I was the gearhead.
You were the film person, right?
I had to make sure the projectors didn't fall over, and all the tape, and I had to change the tapes on the tape decks and do all that kind of stuff. That was the job that I was most suited to.
Did you trip every night?
No, I tripped when I needed to, when I wanted to, and sometimes I would just take a 30 to 50 dose, just enough so you can stay up late.
Right, microdosing before microdosing was a thing.
Because and then basically you have to put everything away at the end of the night. You can't leave stuff behind. Everything has to go back on the bus, and it has to be organized, or you're going to kill yourself you're going to shoot yourself in the head the next time. So I had to stay organized. So I went pretty light during my pregnancy.
And the dad didn't go to Mexico.
Oh, of course not. No. They had jobs. I think the worst one we did was the Portland acid test. The band didn't have a truck at that time, or if they did, I can't remember quite how it went down. But the bus broke down halfway to Portland. This was I think one of the last acid tests. And it was snowing, and it was awful. And, it suddenly became unwieldy to keep doing it. And the place where they had gotten a place to have the acid test in Portland, Oregon, was this old mental hospital. It was abandoned, like an abandoned building that somebody had somehow gotten the keys to it. And it was creepy as heck, and we just decided that was it. We really couldn't do anything.
It ran its course.
It ran its course.
It's funny though, because it was kind of born in a mental hospital, and it ended there. That's interesting.
And we were like an open door mental hospital ourselves with that bus, and you couldn't go anywhere very far in the bus. It only went 45 miles an hour top speed. And you get pulled over, you have to figure you're going to get pulled over at least every hour and a half.
It's too much.
By the cops.
Right.
Yeah. And so it was crazy. But we took it all the way to Manzanillo, Mexico. And the good old bus only broke down a little bit, and subsequently broke down a little more. But it was a safe home. I loved that bus.
Of course. And the crazy thing also, though, is like even to this day, you could meet some hippie kid, and they're either on the bus or off the bus. And it's your bus. You know what I mean? It's like,
isn't that funny? Isn't that cute? I love that.
It's cute, but it's also like the definition of you throw a rock in the water and how far these ripples go. It's like, it's crazy. It's crazy for me to talk to you. You know what I mean? It's like as this person who read about you and studied this world. And I've tried to get as close to it as I can through weird journalistic kind of forays. Like I've gotten to talk to a bunch of people involved in it, but talking to you is better than all of them. I interviewed Bob Weir once when I was on heroin. It was terrible. Oh my God. So bad. So bad.
Oh, honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's my fault. It wasn't anybody's fault but mine. But so when did you and Jerry get close, and when do you jump buses basically from Prankster to Dead?
I think Jerry and I had been looking at each other for a while. Yeah, but I gotta remember, I'm pregnant, with some other guy's kid.
Yeah,
it's just like
heavy duty.
And he was married, and he had a kid on the way too, Heather, who I met. His daughter, his beautiful daughter, Heather, and his wife Sarah. They were part and parcel of the acid test too, because it all kind of came together.
Was it like that quote unquote hippie free love, like everybody got along, no jealousy, whatever? Was that real?
Not entirely, but it tried to be. Let's put it that way. Okay. That was the ideal, that it would be that way. And I know that the guys really thought that was the way it ought to be. The men thought that.
Sure.
And women were a little bit more looked askance at some of the stuff. So suddenly there's this baby thing going on in Mexico, and it was time to come back. But the bus had suffered some terrible wounds in our escape and was missing some serious parts. So it became Fix the Bus time. So during Fix the Bus time, we all repainted the bus. So it looked really good when we came back from Mexico. We had totally redone the paint job. It was beautiful. we stopped in Texas and got the proper gear for it, to replace I don't even know what major part of the bus.
Yeah.
We had been limping along for quite a while.
And Cassidy's driving the whole time.
Cassidy drove not always. No, we had 2 other members on board that could drive the bus. And that was Paige Browning, or Des Prado was his nickname. And George Walker, who was Hardly Visible, that was his name. And George was a really keen mechanic. So he and the guys were able to do some of the repairs on the bus as needed. But it kept breaking down a lot, and it was hot, and it was really, really hot in Mexico. So when our visas were up in 6 months, we cheerfully returned to the States, but we took a long detour. We came back on the east coast of Mexico and went up the east side and came in at some tiny little place in Texas, some tiny little crossover where there was only 2 people in the booth, to check us over. And so they just had us unload all the shit out of the bus and lay it out on the ground so they could look at it. And they sniffed around and waved us through, stamped our papers, and we were back in the States. And they didn't really look at us very hard. I think we were so weird they wanted to get us out of there.
Right. They didn't realize that they could have busted you or whatever they could have done.
We had cleaned thoroughly. We were really clean by the time we got
You were
back
just
to the
super
States.
weird, but clean.
Yeah. And then we just hightailed it because Stuart Brand, who was the initiator of the Whole Earth catalog, he was at that point a promoter of weird events in San Francisco. And he had made a deal with Ken to come back to San Francisco to do the Whatever It Is festival in San Francisco on a certain date. And we had to make it there. And we did. We got there at 6 o'clock, but it was about 5:30 the day of the event. And guess who was playing? Why, it was the Grateful Dead.
I was going to guess that.
And here they come trotting. We parked the bus and we're just exhausted. I mean, we've used up every penny of our money, every bit of water, every ounce of food. And we're sort of from just driving as fast as we could back from Mexico to make it to this event. And apparently there was money involved, which I didn't really know, that Stuart Brand was actually paying us to show up, which was important.
Because he wanted the pranksters to make the scene.
Yeah, because we had made the scene for other of his events in the past. So there we were at San Francisco State, and here comes the members of the Grateful Dead, and trotting through. Here comes Bob Weir. Oh man, oh God, it's so great to see you. Big hugs. We were so happy to see the band because they had been our best friends and partners in all of these acid tests.
Right.
And we had separated from them for half a year, and there had been no communication. So this was just a wonderful homecoming. And then trotting along last in line, here comes Jerry. And Jerry spots me and just runs over and gives me this huge hug. And I immedately had the flash.
Right.
I could see it.
The love light was turned on.
Oh, man, it was on. And both of us we just flashed really hard on each other. And that didn't take long to resolve. So that was it. Bingo. And by that time, I had a cute little baby, and I wasn't pregnant anymore. So
what year was that?
Oh God, 66.
Right, and then basically, like, you watched the Grateful Dead from being this party band to being this phenomena. I mean, it's like it's crazy, really, to consider the Grateful Dead, because it's like the ultimate snowball rolling down Mount Everest. You know,
the snowball analogy is excellent because they took on weight.
Right,
they
exactly.
took on weight in this amazing way. They took themselves seriously. And, thank you, Phil, for he drove the band really eloquently and with huge precision and mastery of music, because he was really the only seriously well-trained musician on in that crew.
Was he big for Jerry to keep up with him? Jerry was like, because like the thing about Jerry, when you read about Jerry, is that he practiced day and night, and like he never stopped playing. Was Phil the inspiration for Jerry to be like, I need to be as serious as I can be?
I believe so. Phil was also a bit of a slave driver,
Nice.
and rightly so, because he could hear, he has perfect pitch, and he could tell when anybody was out of tune
Right.
or out of time, and he would just stop and correct and just do that until they got the they got the thing right. Meanwhile, then they're writing tunes also at the same time, and so they were doing some songwriting. And so it was for them. They were working really, really hard to be as good as they could be, and it showed. And plus, they were taking just a little LSD to, like help them get through a really long couple of sets, or 3 sets, or 4 sets, or whatever the hell they decided to do. So they were mentally in line with us.
Totally.
So we had a pretty deep connection, would have to say.
And when was
getting high together so much,
Yeah, well, you guys both existed in that capacity, and your trip was very attractive to them, and they wanted to do that thing, and then they became kind of the soundtrack, and then they could kind of do both without it being so small and interactive.
Right.
When did Owsley show up?
When did we meet Owsley? Gosh, that's a good one. He was like the invisible guy for a while, and then I don't recall exactly when Owsley showed up, but I do remember his presence at one of Ken's earlier parties before we went to Mexico. He came to one of the parties and made a real big impression on all of us. And he and Ken immediately went in the bedroom and had this long discussion.
The powwow.
The powwow that none of the rest of us heard. So they had a pretty solid mind meld, and Owsley was very generous with us. So he gave us a nice stash, and we shared that with a lot of people.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Owsley was like the premier acid chemist manufacturer in the mid 60s, where everybody wanted his LSD.
Well, even before they knew they wanted LSD, he was making it. So,
but it was symbiotic. It was symbiotic.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted you guys as much as you. He benefited from you and the dead as much as you and the dead benefited from him, and not financially. I just mean that was what he wanted, right?
Yeah, he wanted the LSD thing to grow, and
from what I understand, he was a total character. My favorite Owsley story isn't even an Owsley story. It's the Beatles story of how they smuggled the purple haze out of the Monterey Pop Festival. Did you ever hear that story?
No, I sure didn't, but I was at the Monterey Pop Festival, and
I want to tell you really quickly what they did, because I think you'll think it's funny. Paul McCartney wanted a bunch of Owsley acid, so he sent all this film equipment to the Monterey Pop Festival to shoot it, but he never had an intention of shooting it. He knew that he never had a permit to shoot it, so they loaded up all the lenses with either Blue Cheer or Purple Haze or whatever it was, and then they shipped it all back to England, and that's how they got their Owsley acid.
And the world changed. Wow.
Oh, exactly. So how was Monterey Pop for you? I don't want to miss that.
Well, Monterey Pop was my first experience going to a big festival. I had, this was new. And frankly, getting to see, oh gosh, who did we see at that
Who.
It was so wonderful. With the Who, it was
Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, Hendrix was the one I think that blew everybody's mind completely, because he hadn't really done much in America before. And, he was unknown to us really at the time. We'd heard about him, but we hadn't seen him. And he these guys just put on such a great show. And the Who came on. First Jimi Hendrix sets his guitar on fire, right? And Jerry's over here going like, no way, they can't be doing that. That was like sacrilege, right?
Right.
It was a good Catholic boy. Didn't want to see anything get burned. And then the Who set their stuff on fire.
They smashed it up, right?
Everybody had brought their cans of lighter fluid. And it was so silly and wasteful, and it was
bombastic.
It was a crazy scene. Everybody was trying so hard to be hotter and sharper and weirder than the last guy. It was so male, competitive. It's like it was way worse than basketball.
That's funny.
It's really funny.
Did the Dead play? No. Did they?
I think they did play. Yeah, they did play, but they were they were not happy with their set.
That's like a traditional.
They had to go between the Who and Jimi Hendrix.
Oh my God! What did Jerry say? What did Jerry say?
He hated that they set their guitars on fire. That just pissed him off. He says, "God, some kid would really love to have that guitar." That was how he took it.
That's so funny.
That it was very, very in poor taste to set your guitar on fire.
I remember that the Dead like traditionally hated their performances at these big festivals.
Yes, they had a tough time. Well, the weather was awful. First of all, it was foggy and cold, and everybody's wearing like 4 layers, and because it was kind of miserable out there, and the sun didn't really come out like we'd hoped. But so everybody's guitars kept going out of tune, and that I think caused a lot of consternation. But the thing was that it was this competitive atmosphere, so everybody was just playing their most flashy, wildest stuff, and the Grateful Dead did not do the stunts that the Who and Jimi Hendrix would do. They just didn't do that. They just played music.
They didn't strike me as competitive either.
Break it down. Without showing it, without really. They were doing their best. And the thing of having Flash on stage was not their thing. They were pickers, not flashers. They weren't trying to make a huge racket and noise and thunderous explosions and all of this stuff. It wasn't the circus. They were musicians, and they took it seriously. They took it real serious.
So like when you're touring with them and they're starting, I mean, like when they're doing those concerts in San Francisco and the crowds are growing and the shows are getting bigger. When did you take notice? Like, holy shit, this is much bigger than it was 2 years ago or whatever.
I think it was at the point when they went out and bought a bunch of new amplifiers. They realized after the Monterey Pop Festival that they needed more gear.
Right.
And I think that the help was on the way. They invested in bigger, louder, stronger gear. And that made a big difference as to how well their concerts were received. And they also adjusted their playlist to create more drama in their playlist. I think that experience pushed them into high gear. And then they kind of made a decision not to be flashy, but to just be really good.
Well, and that's when like the Americana really came in, right? Like around then.
Uh-huh.
And
that's when Working Man's Dead, that phrase defines them at that point.
That record is so good.
Isn't it?
Where I hear you, by the way, recently is the good old Grateful Dead cast. Do you listen? I mean, you're on it all over the place. Do you ever listen to it?
No.
It's really,
really.
It's really fun. And they break down Working Man's Dead like one song at a time with all the tracks, like everybody's part and where the song comes from. It's a really very beautiful show.
I think they worked so hard on that album. It was a gigantic piece of work for them, and it was when they really focused and dialed on what they were doing rather than just getting out there and shoving some songs out into the world. They realized that it was going to be really competitive in the music business, and they had to compete.
Well, and they got a real sound. Did you go to Woodstock?
No,
you didn't go to Woodstock. You were at home with the kids.
No. I think I was pregnant again or something. There was something that I had. There was something about the kids that I couldn't go to Woodstock.
What about Altamont?
Yes, I was at Altamont for the whole thing. Ooh, Altamont. Yeah, thank goodness that Altamont didn't turn out to be worse than it was. But it was just a terrible place for a concert. It just didn't work. They had tried several different venues that immediately dried up as soon as the deal was trying to be made. People just backed out. Nobody wanted to host that concert, so they just put it in a place that was very difficult, and
right.
It was a tough spot. And when I remember getting out there, it was a speedway, so the whole grounds were littered with wrecked cars, old wrecked race cars and junk cars, and
The vibes was wrong to begin with.
The vibe was bizarre, and then the incident with the guy with the gun. That incident put such a dark cloud over
The
performance,
scene. Right.
over the whole scene for a long time. Thank goodness for Joel Selden, the columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, who 5 years later, after he went to the Angels trial, he did all this work to try to make sure that they got the story right about what happened. And he finally did. In his book about Altamont, people should read that and see what he finally figured out.
I never read that book. I should check it out. That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
to me.
it's really interesting. And the reality was that the kid with the gun had it pointed straight at Marty Ballin when that angel tackled him.
Wow.
And Marty was lucky to live that day. And that the Hell's Angel that tackled him, because angels were doing a security for it because nobody else wanted to. And he spent 5 years in the joint for murder. And he didn't. He didn't murder the guy. He saved Marty Ballin's life.
Wow.
By taking a shot at the guy with the gun.
I never heard that story either.
Yeah, and that story just kind of got buried in the noise. 5 years later, people didn't notice it. I tell this one to people like, no, Marty's life was saved.
It's funny because then I remember even the quotes, after the fact, everybody blamed the Angels. And Marty Ballin even was pissed because didn't he? Somebody assaulted him on stage, I think, right?
There's a couple of dust-ups that day. Yeah. It was a bad day.
Yeah, I think Jerry said it's a really nice day in hell. I think that was his quote.
Yeah. Well, when we got off, we came in by helicopter from our lovely Marin County. We landed over there, and the first thing you see when we landed was just all these wrecked old cars sitting around under the trees and cans of garbage on fire and stuff like that. It was just a really kind of a rank setting for a gig, and the band was already there. And our helicopter comes in. I'm in the helicopter with 3 of the other wives, Grateful Dead wives. And we get out of the helicopter, and you can't see the stage. We had no idea where we were. And we just stood there in a tight little knot, wondering what to do next. The helicopter goes away to get somebody else. And a second helicopter lands, and out pops Mick Jagger and a couple of the other guys.
Yeah.
And this kid has been over here beating up his girlfriend that we've been watching him. And this kid, I can't imagine how these things happen. He runs over and slugs Mick Jagger in the face.
Who was that kid?
To the ground. I don't know. And then he ran away. I mean, this was within, 1 or 2 seconds after Mick Jagger steps out of the helicopter and he says, "Where's the stage?" And this guy runs over there and smacks him one and knocks him to the ground.
There's footage from then that I saw recently with, they're waiting around. The Dead and the Rolling Stones are waiting around. And Mick is looking very regal and presidential. And someone's like, "Oh, Mick, you know Jerry, right?" And Mick's like, Mick clearly didn't know Jerry. Jerry's kicking Phil in the butt or something. You see the Dead are these kids.
They're horsing around.
Exactly. And Mick Jagger's like, "What the fuck did I sign up for?" It's a really funny clip.
Everybody thought that when they got there, because the place was so not like any other gig you'd ever been at, or who planned this? What's the big question? And so we hid out in the vehicles and behind the stage and under the stage. It was just, and the stage itself was only about 4.5 feet off the ground. So it was wide open to anybody who felt the need, to
there was no
jump
separation. Right. That's not good for an artist. Especially the Rolling Stones and the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane, but the Dead didn't play. They brilliantly did not play.
Oh man. We just had to get the hell out of there because things were going from bad to worse. So, yeah, we were happy to get away. And
that's when the Dead took in Sam Cutler. Was after that, right? Sam Cutler got left behind. Yes. He was the Stones manager.
He got dumped. Yeah. He got dumped by the Stones. But the deal is that the Stones made off with the gate. They made off with all the money. and So Nick had all the cash from the gate in his little bag and jumped on the helicopter, and they went away, and that was it.
Did you ever
nobody
talk?
got
Did you talk to
paid.
him or Keith? Did they talk to Jerry at all, or no?
No, I don't think so. As far as I know, I think they were made very uncomfortable by the whole scene, like everybody else. And everybody just glommed onto their friends, made tight little huddles, and got the heck out of there as soon as they could. Because it was just not going well.
You know what I think is interesting? Because like historically, if you read about the Grateful Dead, they loved the Rolling Stones. Like,
Oh, yeah.
and especially like when the Dead was really into blues. They copped the Rolling Stones. Like it was a big thing, right?
It was. Oh, very much so.
And the Rolling Stones didn't love the Dead.
They didn't even know about the Dead.
No,
I mean,
but
they had no clue.
later on, Keith Richards disrespected the Dead a little bit. If you read about it, it's like I love Keith Richards, but I hate to read about that shit because I love Jerry Moore. So like, but what is interesting to me is how much Pete Townsend loved the Dead. He like played with the Dead. He loved them.
Yes, he did. He came around and played, and he seemed to be a little bit more evolved than the rest of them. They were kind of Stone Age musicians themselves, the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, very much.
They came out of a rough world,
Very much.
and so they were a little different. I think that our nice boys from Palo Alto were kind of sweetheart gentlemen in comparison.
They didn't get it. It was like it was over their heads or around their heads.
The connection didn't get made. Let's put it that way.
No, it's interesting. Like you'd think maybe on the country level, because they loved country, and the Dead were playing some really good country style stuff.
Yeah, they were.
In the Rock Scully book, because I've read like every fucking book. Like I'm
good for you.
I'm a big nerd about this stuff, so bear with me. This is from what I understand. The Coke came in when they went to Europe. Is that right, or did it come in before then?
Oh, let's see. I think that it was around a little bit, but yeah, it did come in when they went to Europe. I went on I think that's the second big Europe tour, and it wasn't a big deal. I think that everybody got really tired at some point because the drives were so long between gigs, and a little speed was helpful. It just kind of came in. I didn't see it myself. I didn't notice how it snuck in, but obviously.
When did you notice Jerry getting so into it?
I think it was at the tail end of that Europe tour. Right at the end, we were exhausted by the end of that thing. It was long, 7-8 hour bus rides between, long. It was just a long trip. So, and plus he was always being asked to do interviews. So, I think I actually don't really know the full ramifications of that story. I was a little clueless back then. So.
But you were with him, and like it's like I think that's when his celebrity was expanding. I mean, like this season, the season of Good Old Grateful Dead cast this season is just Europe 72. So I'm listening to one stop after the next, through all these countries, and they're not really talking about drugs like that. But I remember in Rock Scully's book, he talks about them in a museum in Germany, and that Jerry and Steve Parrish were like obsessed with some big Coke crystal there.
That's right. The world's largest crystal of Coke. I remember them all gathering around the display case and going, oh, wow, man, and it was like, I mean, what the hell? It was probably a fake anyway, So,
right, I'm sure.
But still, they made a big deal out of it. Well, and I had not really paid any attention to Coke up to that point, but that I think was the moment when I started to notice that a little bit too much interest, and I realized that there was a change in the vibe. But it was exhausting. That Europe tour, it was absolutely exhausting.
Right,
really
I'm sure everyone wanted to talk to Jerry. I mean, everyone was photographing him, people were painting
endlessly.
Him, and and I'm sure. Do you think that's when hard drugs became refuge for him within it?
I think Coke caught up with him there because he was offered it by people. So part of that trip was we were the celebrities and other people were trying to
Get
make
you high,
themselves
right.
important.
Sure.
Yeah, ingratiate themselves. And I was not the celebrity at that point. So I didn't get that treatment. I was, thinking about other things, oh, look at the cool clothes. I want to buy some shoes, whatever.
Also, I meant to ask you before, when you ran into Robert Hunter as the coffee guy, when did you make that connection again? Like later on?
Oh, it wasn't until, let's see, where were we? Jerry and I we would rent a place and move into it. And 6 months later, it would be, somebody would want to sell it or blah, blah, blah. You have to get out again. So we had just gotten evicted from this little house we were in. And I was feeling around everywhere for another place to live. It was really hard to get a rental back in the early 70s for us because, we were different from regular folks. So suddenly we were set up with a house, and this beautiful house in Larkspur, and somebody else was moving in with us, and that was Robert Hunter. And I had nothing to do with the deal. It came as a surprise to me because I'd been looking for a place for us to live for weeks, and suddenly it appeared as if by magic. And I think that our attorney and one of the managers kind of came up with this plan of putting Jerry and Bob together so that they would create new songs. And that just worked out great.
Right.
Bob, I hadn't even met Bob Hunter before that. Just barely, and it's like, don't I recognize you from St. Michael's Valley?
That's so funny.
It's like, and his girlfriend Christy at the time, she was just a wonderful gal, and we became great friends. And they would just collaborate. So Bob would come dashing down the stairs at like 10 o'clock in the morning and hand Jerry, 3 songs he'd just written that night, the night before. And Jerry would just, oh, wow, man, thank you so much. And he would just go sit down right that minute and start working on the chord changes for him and working them out and memorizing them. And it just clicked so perfectly. And who knew that this guy Hunter had that skill to be able to weave words like that would inspire Jerry to come up with these tunes. But it was just like magic, and they all came together very quickly, like over just a couple of months was the beginning. I could see the beginning of all of this body of work, and they just kept at it.
So
it was
cool.
Beautiful.
So cool.
Yeah.
And you love to hear about a partnership like that. It's like Elton John and what's his face?
Yeah, but it was the total focus aspect of it that really got me. Like, you couldn't have pried them away from each other when they were working on things. It was like sacred, sacred work.
And they were always friends too, right? Like good friends.
They became very good friends during that period. But Hunter was such a recluse. He didn't really want to engage with anybody. He really did know everybody, but he didn't want to know everybody. He wanted to just work. He just wanted to get up into his room and write lyrics and write poems. And so he was a very prolific, creative guy, but he was kind of rigid about it in a weird way. He wouldn't let you see anything or hear about anything until it was done. So he would deliver a finished work to Jerry.
Right. That was his process.
Jerry,
I know later Robert Hunter would go out and play shows. I actually interviewed Robert Hunter once in my early 20s.
Good for you.
I was on heroin for that one too. It was not a great interview. It was not great. But
wow.
Did you think he ever wish he had played with the Dead or sang with them or anything like that?
They did in the living room, but Bob was not a gifted singer.
No.
He was not a singer by nature. He was a word guy, and he would work out the cadence of the words so that some of the songs really didn't have what you would call a proper structure. So they ramble. Well, Phil really liked that. That was Phil's thing. He said, "Ooh, let's put this in some completely crazy time signature that nobody's ever seen before, and let the musicologists scratch their heads and try to figure this one out." Ah ha ha! Then they made these tunes that were really hard to play,
right?
But they played them anyway. So it was kind of a joke and a puzzle and a creative effort all wrapped into one thing.
I feel like Jerry never got his due as a singer. He was like the greatest singer, And like, I don't think anybody gave him his due. For my money, like that's the problem with Dead and Company, that nobody can sing. O'Teal can sing, but
yes, O'Teal has a beautiful voice.
he should sing more of the Jerry tunes, if you ask me. John Mayer does it like Stevie Ray Vaughan, I feel like. He doesn't do it. He doesn't have that sweetness. Jerry had this ridiculous sweetness to his voice.
Yeah, he worked so hard to get that because he was not a natural singer at all. And he had to really, really struggle to be able to sing well. I'm not going to say anything about Mayer. He's a hot shot for sure.
He's a sick guitar player for sure.
He is amazing.
Amazing.
But Bob, they wanted Bob to sing. First of all, he was real handsome, and lovable. And he had a very particular singing style that was a little frustrating. But, and then when he got into songwriting, it got a lot more frustrating.
Yeah.
Because he abided by no one's rules. It just, it all kind of grew organically. Each one of those musicians got so much better at what they did, just palpable. You could tell just from week to week. They worked so hard the first 4 or 5 years to
get there,
develop their individual voices on stage that could blend and make a good blend, because it's got to work, and it did, But they really, really rehearsed a lot, is all I can say.
I heard that like David Crosby was very much in on their harmonies. Is that true? Were you around that at all?
That is true. Yes, Crosby came in, and he came in and rehearsed with them for a little while there, and taught them about how to create proper harmonic intervals, how to coax the right tone out of a song so that it'll work with the guy next to you instead of their voices clashing. Yeah, he was I think instrumental in helping them refine their sound.
Did you hang out with him at all?
I really liked Crosby. I actually still think the world of him. He had many skills that are kind of hidden from how you might think about old David Crosby. Like, for instance, he took his boat around the world just using old instruments.
Incredible. I know. Incredible.
He did, he loved a challenge. He'd just perk up if there was some really, really difficult challenge there in the music. Boy, he'd just jump right in there.
Somehow where everybody's voice has gotten weaker or terrible, he's like got to be in his late 70s, and he's singing almost as good as he ever sang, if not better. If you ever hear him sing now, he sounds incredible. It's unbelievable. I think he's one of the best singers in the whole rock and roll genre. He just has a great voice, and he somehow takes care of his voice. I know.
It doesn't go off.
It's shocking.
Yeah. So he has my total respect. That rat.
He was a horrible drug addict though. When you were around and he was around, did you see him using a ton? Was that part of? Okay.
Never saw him use. He was well sheltered from my gaze. Believe me.
He always said that he taught them how to sing like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and he always wanted to play like Jerry. You know what I mean? Like he always wanted to play like they wanted to sing like him, and he wanted to play like Jerry. Yes,
he wanted to play like Jerry. This is true, and they hung out a lot together. Not necessarily the best combo, but that's the way it goes. It was always a collaboration for Jerry, always, and he was really good at collaborating and growing as a musician by picking up stuff that other people displayed for him. And then he could pick it up and work it. And he was a good chameleon, as they say. He could copy anybody.
Right.
He would play for hours a day outside of gigs, just working through tunes and getting timing and the fingers to do things the way he wanted it.
It's funny because Jerry doesn't. If you looked at him or you had an idea of him, he doesn't seem like he's the hardest working man in show business. But when you read about him, it never stops, the practicing.
So I would just like to say the word is competitive.
Okay.
He was competitive, and it was just in his nature.
Who was he competitive with exactly?
Everybody, every other guitar player out there. He wanted to be good, so he worked. He worked at it. I didn't know what to make of it, because he didn't relax well. It was hard to get Jerry to calm down and relax. It didn't happen much.
So how was he keyed up? Explain that.
he was driven in this way. He was driven to excel. I don't know exactly where it all came from. It had something to do with his dad. He just wanted to be the best. He wanted it. He wanted the music to be the best. He didn't want to be the best. He wanted the music to be the best.
That he made. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome because he's so he's so competitive, not competitive. He's like this paradox.
Yes.
And if he's so keyed up and there's all this stress, and I know this is like a painful part of the story when heroin creeps in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when does it creep in? When do you notice? Like, when do things start to change around him and in the house and stuff?
Well, I think it escaped my notice for a while because he was just taking a little bit here and there, to help him go to sleep and stuff like that, or relax. And then I don't know the full story. It was not really ever revealed to me, but between various managers and various musical guests, it crept in.
Right.
And I didn't see it at first because it was very low key. But it was a big surprise because he had always told me, don't ever, ever, ever go near this drug. He was warning me off of it. I think he had seen friends of his, take the fast route to hell with heroin. And so he was very explicit to me about staying away from anybody that was using heroin. And this basically had to do with his friendship with Janice. Because he and Janice were friends, Janice Joplin.
And she lived near Larkspur, right?
Well, she lived in Larkspur,
right.
Just about, 3 stone throws down the street. So he perceived, the Janice's band members were using heroin. And it scared him enough to come to me and tell me to watch out and stuff. But meanwhile, he's hanging out with those guys and playing with them and stuff. And so it got him. And he liked it.
The story that you read about, or that I've read about all over the place, was that they were doing this heroin that came from, they called it Persian, and
and they
they acted like it wasn't heroin. They would call it Persian.
I heard
and they would pretend like they weren't strung out on heroin, that they were just smoking a little Persian, right?
Well, your information is good. That's all I can say. And yes, that's the story I was left with, which doesn't make much sense.
Did he ever say it to you? Don't worry, Carolyn, I'm just smoking this Persian. I'm not shooting heroin.
Yeah, he did say he wasn't shooting. I mean, as long as I remember, he was very careful, not to. But snorting and it doesn't help you either. I mean, no. It's totally addictive. And so I actually got into his little teeny weeny stash one time. I wanted to see what the heck he was doing. And it just I took a tiny amount, it was like, oh my God, it knocked me flat.
Sure.
For hours, and I'm going, holy moly, this is not for any creative purpose. This is just to knock you on your ass and hold you down and step all over you, And so I took a pretty militant position, and we did have some rather flaring arguments about it. And he lied to me considerably about it at first. And so I didn't really get a handle on it until it was too late.
Right. But it's funny because when I started using heroin, I was producing TV. I was not the leader of the Grateful Dead. And my TV show, nobody watched. It was not, but I felt pressure. And I felt keyed up. And when I started sniffing heroin, I still felt creative, but I felt relaxed. You know what I mean? So like, it did put me on my ass, but it made me feel like I could be creative and not care and not worry. Yeah. And I can imagine why Jerry did it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So cocaine had already made a significant dent, before heroin came along. And so they kind of came hand in hand. And it was devastating, really. I remember basically when things just started to come unglued, Jerry would just go in a room and lock the door, after a few years of this. He would no longer engage. And it ruined relationships and certainly took ours with it. So I was never even tempted by that stuff. Well, partly because he had warned me about it so strictly in the past. Oh, never, never. Because he knew. And so he felt guilty. It was a struggle for him to deal with the heroin addiction, he had an awful lot of help getting into it, so it was, people wanted to give him stuff.
Right.
So that was the biggest problem of all.
It couldn't stop.
People were just laying it on him, man. Hey, man, it was the hey man. And yeah,
right. Horrible.
Jeez.
Funny, but
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah, and there was nothing I could do. I couldn't deal with it. We had a couple of kids. I was
You had
busy.
little kids, right?
Yeah,
and it's the opposite. It's the opposite of the idealized hippie dream that you kind of signed up for. It's the opposite, right?
Well, it devolved, certainly. But on the outside, to the audience and the fans, everything was going great. The band was playing more and more shows. They were playing really, really well.
Yeah.
Long, wonderful shows that everybody come out just grinning and smiling. And wow, the love was spreading all around. And it just, yeah, but the band and especially Jerry were wearing themselves out. And it hurt his health a lot. He'd always had just absolutely springy, amazing health. And it slowly went away until he was no longer a healthy guy. And that was sad. It was tough, and we couldn't deal with it. It was one of the hardest things. I don't like to talk about it.
Well, the other paradox is that you're going to these incredible shows, and everybody's leaving, like you're saying, smiling ear to ear.
Yeah.
And Jerry's coming home and locking himself into a room, like possessed. And that's what addiction is. It's like, it's obviously like, it's an illness. I have it, and a lot of our audience has it. So it's like, I'm not demonizing Jerry Garcia. Addiction is a horrible thing. I'm sad that you had to deal with it as his wife and his partner,
Yeah.
and how, and the kids, you know what I mean? I'm sure it was very hard on the kids.
It was because he disappeared in this obvious but very subtle way, and there was no way to change it. And I know that my daughters saw more than was good for them to see, and they love their dad, but it was just a really difficult time, and I had to split. So I split because we could not keep going the way it was going.
What was the, like, when it got to that point, were you just like, I'm not communicating with you, it's obvious you're strung out, this is not a place I want to raise children in?
Yeah, but it was worse. It was not even want to. It was have to go. I had to get out because it was too negatory. It just, everything was, it's like watching all your work just slide down the river into the mud hole.
The dream,
it was just
the dream too.
Yeah. And not being able to communicate really well with anybody who was in a helpful mood also was difficult. And I felt like the band in particular, who I cherished that band. I loved that band. And somehow a love started to go away.
That's what happens with the drugs. That's what happens. 100%.
And it was tragic to me. I was heartbroken. Anyway, but I survived. I survived all that, and my kids are good people, and they're not mad at me anymore. They were for a long time.
What were they mad at you for?
For leaving, for moving away, having to get out.
You went to Oregon?
I moved to, I picked the kids up and just went and lived someplace else because it was too harrowing, hanging in with the addiction going on. It was too hard.
Well, my family left me. It was me and we never got married, and we had a little baby. And I wasn't doing great. And then I wound up relapsing with the baby in the house.
Boy.
It was me and my partner and our newborn, basically, and I relapsed. And my partner and the baby left and left me in Queens, and they moved to Long Island, and I didn't get back with them for 5 years. So I understand. I understand the story very well.
And it's heartbreaking because all you want to do as a significant other is rescue the situation, but at that certain point,
and you can't.
You realize you can't. There's nothing you can do. It's a done deal. Your partner has fallen into this thing, and you can't get him out of it, and it breaks your heart.
And but the other thing that I've read is that when he went into the diabetic coma, you were like one of the main people that saved him.
Well, I did try, I came back and did my best, really. But yeah, I did my best. That's all I can say. And I don't even like to think about it.
Well, he got a little bit sober time then too.
Mm-hmm,
And
he did.
he had that look in his eye, that Jerry look, the good Jerry
Yeah.
look, you know.
Yeah, he came back around for a while. He did. And he worked it. He worked hard to stay sober for quite a while. But it kept coming to him. He wasn't going out to look for it. It kept coming to him. And I don't know who to blame, and I'm not going to play the blame game.
It's an
It just
addiction.
was. It just was, That's the way it was.
Well, you're dealing with addiction, which is one of the craziest, most primal forces, and you're dealing with the Grateful Dead, which is a ridiculous primal force in itself.
And a lot of really smart people who could pull the shades on you anytime if they don't want to be seen. So there's a lot of shady characters that I never saw. It was very difficult for me as a mom and a wife. So,
I mean, he had very, very few periods of sobriety, I know, after he got addicted, really. Very few.
Yeah, he had a few, though, and they were productive. He did. He would get off for a little while, struggle, get off for a little while, do a whole bunch of work, and then feel, oh, thank goodness that I got that record finished. Now I can
do what I want to do.
Now I can relax, or whatever the phrase was.
No, I know the feeling very well. I've seen footage in that Amir Bar-Lev documentary, Long Strange Trip, where he's with, I think, Trixie or Annabelle, and they're going to a show, and he's like got a briefcase, and she's a little kid, but he seems sober,
Yeah.
And I'm sure like those moments were incredibly important to you and the girls.
They were, and he did have sobriety flashes. He did get sober several times, and it was wonderful, because then he'd actually look you in the eye,
right,
and would be present. But the toll it took on him was huge. I think it diminished him as a person tremendously, and his big, outgoing, happy personality would disappear when he would start to use again, and it was really noticeable.
We lose ourselves if we use heroin, and I know people right now who are relapsing and they're gone. And they're going dark is what they are. Exactly.
That flashing, light-filled personality goes dark, and you miss it as a partner and a friend and a co-conspirator. Suddenly they're just gone. Off the board,
They're not there anymore. Exactly. It's possession.
And you as a player on this chessboard, you just lost your main player. You've lost your pieces. You're suddenly without a plan. You don't have a scheme anymore for making things continue, and you have to let go.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to be in that situation. And I feel sorry for all the moms and the families
wives
out there that are struggling and having to protect themselves and protect the family and take action that they would never dream they would have to take.
Right. That tough love, that separation, that leaving, because they left first. You know what I mean? Like when I relapsed, I was gone.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I get it. At what point?
That's a horrible realization. That realization. It is a nightmare when you realize that your partner's been lost. You've lost your partner. And it's just like, oh, it's the worst feeling. And you've got to stand on your own 2 feet and take care of business just like normal. And yet, it's with a broken heart, really. So
is that when you got into growing and farming and advanced botany and all that stuff? Is that
I had been doing that for a while. I got into that when we bought our first house. We bought a house that had a garden area, and I immediately started because at that, this was in the early 70s, 72, and everything was really going good. And we bought this nice house that had a big garden area, sunny, it was just the perfect spot, private. And at that time, the weed trade had really picked up. Some interesting strains of weed were coming from all over the place.
Right.
So I collected seeds because it all was seedy weed in those days. It had seeds in it.
Sure.
Sensimilla was not really thought about yet. So I had Panama weed, I had Colombian seeds, I had all these different, I started collecting, I couldn't help myself because it was fun. And so I grew a nice garden with all different kinds of stuff and wrote about it, and started telling people how to grow.
At a time where it was not a safe thing to tell people how to do it too.
No, and so that Jerry got upset with me actually about it because what are you doing? We could get busted any time, but we didn't.
Why not?
Because I would harvest completely. When I harvested, I would make it disappear. I didn't leave signs around, and besides the fire department would warn me when somebody was coming to look.
Nice.
Yeah, we had friends. But it was just it was such a great experiment. And then I wrote about it. And the first thing I wrote this 20-page mimeograph thing called Otto Peep. That was my moniker.
That's your pseudonym,
for
Otto
myself.
Peep?
That was my pseudonym. It was called Otto Peep.
Why Otto Peep?
Well, we were giggling. This was, I was just making up something silly.
Right.
So, and we had a little drawing of this little short, fat guy with a hat. And this was Otto Peep, and
That's
this was
funny.
his work. I didn't want to claim it, but everybody knew. Whoever I gave it to knew that I wrote it. But anyway, so it was like a 20-page, maybe it was 15 pages long, and I just stapled the corner together, run it up on the copy machine, and gave them out to all the roadies, and I gave a bunch to the airplane roadies and to anybody I felt really needed to read this. Here's how to grow great weed. It's so much fun. It's so easy. Just follow these easy directions. And so that was very popular. And suddenly the weed got a lot better. And then I got a contract to turn it into a book.
The Sensimilla book.
Yeah, my book, A Primo Plant, which was a bestseller. I've sold over 120,000 copies of that sucker over the years.
Awesome.
And I've still got boxes of them in my office right now, if anybody's interested.
All right, Dopey Nation, if you want a book, tell me the title of the book again.
Primo Plant.
Wasn't there something about Sensimilla in the title?
Yeah, Growing Sensimilla Marijuana, I think is the subtitle.
Well, anyone in the Dopey Nation, if you want one of these books, write me an email at dopeypodcast@gmail.com and I'll get it to Carolyn.
Oh, that's sweet.
Incredible. I mean, listen, your story is insane. I could ask you a billion questions. Because you wound up back near Kesey again. And with that world, did the psychedelic aspect diminish? Or should I say, did imbibing with psychedelics diminish?
It did. And I would say that it did, especially among the maternal aspects of my life, because I was really busy with 3 kids and I just really didn't have time to party. It was just, I became kind of anti-party.
Well, you grew up.
Yeah, I did. I took responsibility for 3 young ladies, and I just didn't want it to get weird around them, because I'd had enough of weirdness. By the time my third daughter was born.
You think? Definitely, right?
I just wanted everything to be normal, and that doesn't sound like very much fun, but God, it's a lot easier than weirdness.
Well, there's so much potential for fun. When things can be steady, you have the potential to have a good time. And when things are totally not steady and fucked up, maybe you'll have a good time here and there, but the ability to be joyful it's diminished.
Right, and to have things be all uncertain and constantly changing, it's hard on kids. They don't like that. Things should need to be steady there. You got to have a steady boat to raise a family well, I think. And just being part of the whole Grateful Dead scene and the amount of external interest in everything that we did, it didn't make for an easy upbringing for the girls. They were exposed to a lot of stuff that maybe they shouldn't have been exposed to, but that was just the world we lived in. And
how weird was that as the Dead phenomenon doubled, tripled, quadrupled, quintupled in the
It was-
illness of addiction, how weird is it for them to, like, you know, Jerry's 40, 45, 50, and there's whatever, 50,000 people there praying to him. Like, what does that do to the kids?
Well, it was kind of weird, and I don't know. You know, I haven't asked them that specific question. I think it was just the way things were, you know, and so they grew up
Totally.
in this scene. We didn't question it that much. You know, we knew it had ragged edges and dark corners and weird crawly holes and what was going on under the stage that we didn't know about. There was many aspects. As the Grateful Dead scene grew, so did the crew. The crew got up. They had 50 employees at one point, and they carried around this stage set that was this enormous heavy thing. You know, it was tons of equipment and new people coming in and engineers and all this stuff. And it wasn't about kids. It was all about adult men creating this fabulous world of music, performance, and travel. Because the travel part really was one of the more difficult pieces of being part of the band. Was the travel was
Endless,
tough.
endless, and to support
Endless.
all that. Phil, I remember
Yeah.
seeing Phil say, if we had just considered Jerry a little bit more and taken a break, maybe he could have gotten well. And it's a great question that obviously there is no answer for. But do you think he had it in him? I mean, this is a stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think he had it in him to get sober, or was that something that Jerry never could have done?
Oh no, I think he could have done it, but I think the demands on his time, energy, and attention were so great. And he was not somebody to turn down a challenge either. You know, somebody would come to him and say, "Hey, man, you know, let's do a couple of gigs together,"
Right.
or you know, whatever the challenge du jour was, he wanted to do it. You know, he could not resist. And I feel like heroin addiction, it didn't seem to be something that he was resisting very hard until it had knocked him to the ground and almost done him in a few times. And then he kind of took it more seriously and made significant efforts to get better. But there was a lot of subversion coming from outside, is all I can say.
Too many people were his lackeys and like benefited from him being high. Maybe they got to get high.
And they wanted the end. They wanted the inside connection. So that was the biggest thing that was not calculable. You couldn't see wherever it was ever coming from.
There was probably people thought they could control him. You know, he was this genius, and then you can control him with this nothing thing. You know, this.
Well, you can get his attention anyway. You know, which is what people really wanted was a piece of his attention.
Right.
And he would, and you know, that's just the way the heroin game goes. And this was a hard lesson for all of us in our family. And I think that our daughters were not happy, you know, a lot. It was very hard, God, because they'd want to see their dad, and he would not be in any kind of shape. You know, he would just be a mess, really. And he had friends to get high with, you know, that were not helping. They were not helping. But they were great people, but they were also addicted.
Afflicted, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that made it very difficult when you meet great people who are also heroin addicts, people you really like, and they're cool and funny and, dangerous.
I get it. Did you, just out of curiosity, did you spend any time with Bob Dylan?
Nope. Bob was very furtive. You know, he was there and then he wasn't there. You know, that was his thing. He did come and collaborate with them, but it was a closed session.
And it was bad. It wasn't good. It was bad.
It was very frustrating. Jerry was upset about it. He came back from those and he couldn't believe just the weirdness around Dylan was palpable. And it made him
what would Jerry say about the Dylan with the Dead time?
Just that it was so hard to talk to Bob. He wasn't amenable to collaborating. It had, you know, was his way or the highway kind of deal. Jerry did not feel like he was being used to the best of his ability. You know,
he's a bizarre character, the most bizarre.
Yeah, but competitive. right?
Who, Dylan?
Yeah.
Oh, so competitive. But it's like,
Yes.
why ask the Dead to be his band and then not tell them what key he wanted them to play in or something?
Exactly. He didn't want to collaborate. He was too competitive to collaborate with the people he was supposed to collaborate with. And so it was hard. Jerry was very upset about the whole thing because he loved Dylan. He loved those songs. They were a huge part of his repertoire and his
soul,
inspiration.
Yeah.
He just loved that stuff. And he came back from those Dylan sessions a very disappointed guy that Bob was not playing ball the way that Jerry saw that they could. It just didn't happen.
It's like one of those things. It's like, but then the Jerry Grisman thing is like the greatest collaboration.
Oh yeah. David Grisman, what a guy. And just the cleverest musician too. And always just, melody just flowed out of him. It really did.
The two of them though, that's perfect collaboration.
Yeah, they were so happy together. That was really the cure for the hurt he got from Dylan was working with Grisman and David Nelson and his other fun bands. That was great stuff. And it's still, I just love listening to that stuff.
Yeah.
You can hear the joy of bluegrass. That was like, Jerry loved bluegrass. That was his favorite thing. And to be able to just sit and play and go out and play with those guys, that just made him so happy. And he loved playing banjo, loved playing the pedal steel, and getting off the guitar for a while was play for him, like real play, where you come home happy.
Yeah, it was the joy was palpable. Like when you listen to those Garcia Grisman records, they're like they don't seem to exist within time, right? It's like some future past music where everything about it is perfect. Like that shit is like, it's like the greatest thing ever. And I think he was using even then, and it was perfect.
He was using some, but not a lot.
He was energized. He was energetic as hell.
Energized because he had to be able to keep up with Grisman, who was like greased lightning, and does not slow down. But it was love, it was the power of love of music. I think really helped him get clean.
Yes.
And the playing Grisman was a key player in Jerry's life because his love of those old tunes propelled Jerry back into normalcy. I think into a better way of being.
And I read that Merle Saunders also was like a big thing for Jerry to come out of the
Merle. When Jerry was kicking, Merle would go stay with him, and they would just work on tunes together. And Merle would play, and Jerry would play. And I mean, Merle was the sweetest, gentlest cat you ever met. Just. Right. He had so much love in his heart, and he worked it. He worked that love. It didn't just sit there. He was a marvelous influence. I just. Now thank you, Merle. Thank you.
I have one last really stupid question, Carolyn. You ready?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. You've had this life, this incredibly adventurous life that have taken you to places like supernatural places and like epic chemically enhanced places, but also epically communal places. And like I said before, so many people want to emulate this experience. Is that weird for you? Like, is it possible? Like, it seems impossible that anyone has any sort of experience the way your scene did in those years. Like, how do you react to young people kind of wanting to emulate that scene?
I don't react to that. I don't see them very much, but I will say that, the job is to innovate. You've got to innovate and be active and come up with new stuff to make that all work. You can't just keep doing the same old shit.
Right.
And it's just, it's sometimes it's really hard to find that groove as a creative person, but to be truly creative, you've got to invent some things and find what turns your heart on. I remember watching Jerry, he'd pick up some lick from somebody. He'd be watching Porter Wagoner's show on TV, when Porter Wagoner was on TV with Dolly Parton back in the late 60s, and we had this little TV, and he'd sit there and he'd just grin, and he'd reach into his musical library and pull out licks and then play along with Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton. These were, that's the inspiration, the inspiration of good music or, a good creative act. I think creativity is one of the great keys to the universe. Our life in this universe depends on human creativity.
Right. And
without it, we got nothing,
Sure. And what you're saying is it's pure love. He loved that. So he reached into the bag to try to channel it through his ability. And then it came out like something else. So it was an innovation based on love and all that. Yeah.
And he went out and bought a pedal steel and then another one and then another one. And he'd sit up late at night and I can hear him working out the licks he just picked up off of the Porter Wagoner show on the pedal steel. And he'd be so happy with himself. It was joyous. And finding the joy, I think, was one of Jerry's greatest gifts.
Right. And sharing it. That's why everyone loves him.
Sharing it with everybody.
That's why everyone loves him. And did you go on Festival Express or no?
Oh, yes. Oh, that was a riot. Oh, God.
All right. So before we go, tell us a little bit about, that was like my favorite of all the stupid movies about that era. Did you see the Festival Express movie?
Yeah, I did. I didn't think the movie quite did justice.
Well, you were
to
there.
How crazy the train trip was. I mean, basically, it was a crazy, crazy scene. We had a couple of people that were trying to be filming stuff on the train. And the thing was that everybody got hammered so thoroughly on booze on that train. There just didn't seem to be any other drugs on board that I knew about. And and I was like, and I don't drink. So I was like, oh, heck, I'm here all by myself. I can't stand alcohol. It makes me terribly ill.
Me too.
And I'd get up in the morning, people would just be sprawled on the floors and there's empty bottles everywhere. It was just nuts. And yet it was very, very funny. And then they had to go play and with terrible hangovers and stuff. So it was pretty silly. And there was supposed to be the movie. I haven't seen the movie in a long time, but the filmmakers were complicit, I would say, in overdoing things thoroughly. So
they overdid it with the alcohol, right? My favorite one is like there was a scene with Jerry and Janice and Rick Danko, and they're playing "Ain't No Cane" or something, and they harmonize, and they're all drunk as shit. But it's beautiful, It's a beautiful scene.
Yeah, it was one of the few times I ever saw Jerry drink because he didn't drink. He didn't like alcohol. But when you're on the train with a bunch of drunks, what are you gonna do?
You're gonna drink.
So
you're gonna drink.
Yeah,
Carolyn, I cannot thank you enough.
You are welcome.
You've been ridiculously generous with your time and stories. Good. If you ever need anything from me, please never hesitate to ask.
Well, thank you so much. And I enjoyed talking to you. You ask all the right questions. So you really know your stuff. I'm impressed. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And be in touch. If you ever come to New York, please look me up. If I go to Oregon, I'm going to look you up, whether you like it or not.
Good. Thank you so much.
So there you have it. Fucking Mountain Girl, Caroline Adams Garcia. Such an honor to talk to her. And this is like the longest Dopey episode ever that isn't one of our crazy compilation episodes. But I figured, I believe that this woman is a very, very important woman in American history and counterculture history and all this stuff. And to have her be on the show is such an honor for me. And to hear, and also it's just a story about being married to a drug addict. It just happens to be Jerry Garcia, It's I can't say enough about how happy I was to have her on. But before we go, I wanted to read another email, and I'm sure only the true hardcore dopes are still here. So if you're still here, let me know. Send an email to dopeypodcast@gmail.com. Let me know what you thought about the interview. Let me know, is this too long of a show? Can you guys handle this kind of a show? I don't even know. Here we go. I got this email a while ago, and it just seems appropriate to read it now. And all right, he says, "Hi, Dave. Please RSVP me for DopeyCon 3. By the way, now we're just calling it DopeyCon. We're not calling it DopeyCon 3. I heard you mention on episode 360 about mailing you if you are coming. Yes, please, everybody RSVP. Since I'm emailing you, thanks for reading my dog poop purse story a bit ago. I played it for my wife, and she rolled her eyes and was happy for me, which was great. I really love the podcast, and thanks for keeping it going. It's a part of my daily routine and was and is a big part of me staying sober. I'm always grateful for it. Here's one for you. If you read this, please don't mention my last name. You can just call me Dopey Drunk. You don't have to read it, though, because I know it's long. I just wanted to share. This is his story of I become Dallas Jesus and levitate. Summer of 2009, Dallas, Texas. I was drinking liquid ton daily and experiencing a lot of negative physical effects, including chest and lower abdomen pain, massive anxiety, and mental confusion. I quit cold turkey, not recommended, and at day 2, I had what I thought was lockjaw. I couldn't open my mouth. I went to the doctor for the lockjaw, didn't disclose the drinking, and he gave me a shot, I think. Steroids. The lockjaw cleared up, went home, and didn't sleep for 3 days up to that point. Day 3, I thought God himself was texting me on my BlackBerry, telling me things like, I am his creation, I am his chosen one. A text told me I should go find a church and tell my story and show the text to a priest. I went out at 11 p.m. and found a couple churches, but no one was there. Went home and relayed this to a relative who arranged for an ambulance to pick me up the next morning. Day 4, I was taken to some kind of ward with open bay cots in Dallas. It must have been a detox ward. There were a lot of scary-looking dudes, homeless people, etc. I was in full-blown anxiety, and I couldn't stay still. To get up and move around, I was drinking a ton of water. An attendant told me I had to stop drinking water. This part is as real as anything I've ever experienced. I believed God was communicating with me at this point and told me to stand up. I did. I closed my eyes, and I put my arms out and yelled something like, I am the power of Christ. The power of Christ compels you. In retrospect, I think this comes from a version of what the priest said in The Exorcist, which I read when I was a kid. I felt myself levitate. A homeless dude nearby started saying, Amen, tell it, brother, praise Jesus. Attendants rushed me, carried me off to a room where I was screaming the compels you part, put a straitjacket on me, and gave me some kind of tranquilizer injection. They left me in the dark room. While tranquilized, I heard the devil's voice as clear as day tell me things like, your life is over, you'll be determined insane, fired from work, lose everything you have, and be condemned to a life among the insane. Then you will die and go to hell for eternity. Day 5 and 6, I woke up in a room with a TV and bed like a regular hospital room. No straitjacket. I had room service food and watched some great shows. They did a lot of tests on my liver, pancreas, and other organs, which were all miraculously fine. My family member flew into Dallas and got me out of there. It was determined to be a psychotic break. The massive amounts of water I drank were probably a factor. A negative water intoxication. I think that's funny. A negative reaction to the steroids or whatever could have been a factor. Same for the alcohol withdrawal. When my sister dropped me off at home, I wouldn't let her into my place. I still feel bad about this. I lived alone, and the massive 3-foot-high piles of empty beer cans and bottles were like rolling mountains throughout the house, and I was embarrassed and didn't want her to see the full extent of my alcoholic squalor. I stayed sober maybe 6 months and slowly slid right back into it. I finally stopped for real in 2017 after a long and twisted path, after giving up on my own bullshit, admitting some hard fucking truths to myself, deciding what I want to be here for my wife and kids, and deciding to live the life I should. I drink professionally and alcoholically between 1993 and 2017 with small breaks in between. Grateful to you, Dave and Chris, God rest his soul, for the podcast. It's been with me a few months prior to getting sober in 2017 and was part of what influenced me to do it. Like it says in Wharf Rat, which is a Grateful Dead song, but I'll get back on my feet again someday. The good Lord willin', if he says I may. I know that the life I'm living's no good. I'll get a new start and live the life I should. I'll get up and fly away. I'll get up and fly away. I'll get up and fly away. Be well. And that's Edward, Dopey Drunk. He does a lot of cool art too. So thank you, Edward. And This is a long fucking episode, so I bear with me if you're like, damn, Dave. I guess you're not listening if you're like that. But when I lived in Ithaca in the summer of 1994. I lived in this house, and I was bored to death. Nobody in the house had a car. It was me, my friend Ryan, DK, and I guess it was the three of us. And Todd came out, and Todd took my room, and Todd introduced me to the Grateful Dead, and he gave me the Grateful Dead, the live record, Skullfuck. I think it was Grateful Dead, and it had Wharf Rat on it. And it also had the version of Bertha that I opened the show up with. And it changed my life. And I remember we used to eat so much acid in that house and play music. And that's when I really fell in love with the Dead. And Wharf Rat is still one of those songs. So anyway, that's my story. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Please write an email. Please send a voicemail. Please join Patreon and buy merch. And since this is a thematically Grateful Dead episode, I'm going to play And We Bid You Good Night. And I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it real quick again. When I lived in Los Angeles with Todd, we would smoke a lot of meth. And we were shooting a movie. We were working on a movie with these people. And Todd, I think, played a homeless person in the movie. And I kind of worked on the crew. And we sat in the car and we listened to And We Bid You Good Night over and over and over. And I wound up singing it to both of my children as a lullaby. And I'm going to play that. Everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of the show. Stay strong, Dopey Nation, and fucking toodle.
Lay down, my dear brothers, lay down and take your rest. I want you to lay your head upon your Savior's breast. I love you, oh, but Jesus loves you the best. And I bid you good night. Good night, good night, and I bid you good night, good night, good night, and I bid you good night, good night, good. Walking in Jerusalem just like John. Good night, good night. I remember right well, remember right well. Good night, good night. His right shall comfort me. Good night, good night. Still laid on the altar that wonderful bowl. Good night, good night. Let it be for the beast at the end of the wood. Good night, good night. Good to eat all the children would not be good. Good night, good night. But I thought I'd stop shall comfort me. Good night, good night, good night. Lay down, my dear brothers, lay down and take your rest. I want you to lay your head upon your Savior's breast. I love you, oh, but Jesus loves you the best. And I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night. Sing it with us. Lay down, my dear brothers, lay down and take your rest. I want you to lay your head upon your Savior's breast. I love you, oh, but Jesus loves you the best. I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night.
What's up, Dave and Chris? My name's Jake. I'm 25 years old from West Virginia. I just found Dopey about 2 weeks ago, and it's my favorite podcast of all time. Y'all are hilarious, and it's just gotten me through some really hard times. And though I'm not clean myself, you know, it gives me a lot of hope for the future. I really like Dave's song, and I'm going to do a little cover of it here on my banjo. Hope y'all don't mind too much. I wrote a third verse myself. Sorry about the poor quality. It's just on my phone. And, sorry about the banjos. Things hard to keep in tune.
Wanna take a walk around the world. Wonder would it do me any good? Till I get some honey in my pockets, and I guess I'll just have to walk around my neighborhood. I wanna be good so bad. Wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. Wanna take a ride up in the sky. Watch as airplanes just pass me by. And I wanna see a Lear jetliner take a dive, just to show all of these people what it means to be alive. I wanna be good so bad. I wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. In my burned out basement listening to the Dopey show. Home friends I had are on this little radio. I keep checking on my pulse because it feels like I might die. But the thought of straightening up sounds so much better when you're high. And I wanna be good so bad. I wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had.
Well, I hope y'all hear this. Makes it through the big inbox of emails. Feel free to play a clip on the show if you want. If not, I know it kind of sucks. Alright, really appreciate it. Thanks, y'all.